On this episode of the Minuteman Initiative, we get into the importance of physical fitness and being able to perform at a high physical level, and how that's directly going to inform your ability to do a lot of different tasks that we'll find right at home within that modern Minuteman mission. To help us with this conversation, we invited on Sam Wood of DAGR Management. Sam is very qualified and very experienced in high-performance fitness. And we get into what he calls combatant athleticism and kind of the basics you need to get started heading in that direction, and good ways to prime your body to be an asset rather than a liability. This was such a valuable topic. I'm so thankful that Sam made the time to come on. This is a long episode, but I highly encourage you to make the time to listen to this. There's some really good beneficial information in here, and there's a lot of additional resources that we try to provide that you can follow on and continue your education. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Here. So, got a pretty fun episode today. We're going to be getting into fitness and talking about the importance of that. But I have the honor to introduce a good friend of mine, somebody I'd consider a brother, one of the dudes that I served in the U.S. Army with, Mr. Sam Wood. Sam, how you doing this morning?
Good, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, he's going to come in here and help us break down fitness. And Sam's always really been into physical fitness and nutrition and, kind of going the extra mile with that in a good way. And he's got a lot more knowledge on it than we do. And it's such an important aspect. So we want to get into that. But first, I want to talk a little bit about Sam and what he's doing and the company he owns and what he's got going on in life. So, dude, how's it been going? And, introduce yourself to the people.
Thanks, man. So I'm Sam. I own a company. It's called DAGR Management. It's an acronym for Defensive Applications and Global Risk Management. The idea behind this, actually, when we first started, it was actually a security company. I had gotten my license through the state of North Carolina. It started out as a security company. I did that for a few years, and it was great. It was a lot of fun, had a lot of opportunities to meet a lot of people. We primarily did private security, PSD stuff. But it was a high turnover rate, a lot of stuff that I would say more or less on the political side of things that just continued to be more burdensome than I cared to try and take on. So I kind of dissolved that aspect of it and rebuilt it more or less into a training company. The goal was to be a little more encompassing. I didn't want to just have firearms instituted into this. I consider that to be a variable of the equation, but I didn't consider it to be the entire part of the equation. So it ended up being a multifaceted concept for me, from firearms training, pistol, carbine, long guns, trauma, all the way to the other end of the spectrum of combatives, such as grappling, which is what I generally specialize in. Physical fitness, which I think is huge, and I think it's probably one of the most understated thing within our community as defense practitioners. We tout the Second Amendment as if it's primarily relegated to guns and guns alone. But if I were to see in its inception, like the context of it is to create equal or greater power than a governing body that has the potentiation for being tyrannical. So in that mindset is we have to understand, for me, like, what power does the government have? And you and I and your brother as well, we all served, and we know that the elements pertaining to that was not just firearms training, right? It was, communications, team-based elements, and physical fitness, and minor bushcraft aspects of that, and just it was a lot more encompassing. What the government has is not just firearms alone. It's a far more encompassing aspect as far as capabilities are concerned. And I think for us, for we the people, quote unquote, and I'm using air quotes here, should have, or at least try and mimic that in the best capacity as possible.
Yeah.
So I wanted my company to do that. I wanted to try and be as full encompassing as I could, and not just mimic what I find, the Department of Defense or Department of State to be able to uphold in those aspects, but to actually do it better, because we aren't limited. You, me, you guys we're not limited to a specific budget per se, obviously our income ratio, but we can take it in stride and kind of almost manipulate it a little bit better, just because we have that sense of freedom, and we're also not as dogmatic about it. I think that tends to be one of the biggest crux, I will say, or the Achilles heel of the military, is we almost become dogmatic in nature. And while I do agree you need staples to create a level of discipline, I think you also need to be willing to evolve. And I think that's probably the hardest part for the U.S. military. So taking the strength of like, hey, this is to create that equal or greater power of our governing body, take some learning points from them, but then also the civilian side of it in learning how to evolve and saying, hey, let's do some R&D here. Let's do some experimentation. Let's try and, create the best system that we possibly can. And that was kind of what I wanted to do with the company. I will say that we're a little bit past our infancy stages, but we're definitely, as a company, we're still a little more adolescent in nature. I don't think we've even come close to fully maturing to our full potential, but it's definitely been a lot of fun. It's been a blast. As you stated before, you and I were in the military together. We're infantry paratroopers together. And your brother 11 Bravo 1 Papa too as well, correct? Yeah. So, and you guys kind of specialized a little bit differently, but obviously the same classification and field that we did. Just a little bit, you guys honed in on a little bit more of a particular element than we did, which is pretty cool. But I think as far as my history is concerned, that's pretty much, after I got out of the military, we did contract work. You and I did some stuff together. I did some stuff a little bit beyond that. After I left the state of Alaska, and then went and did contract work for Department of Defense, Department of State, Department of Justice. So that's pretty much it for me. As far as certifications or qualifications, ISSA, NASM certification for sports science, strength and conditioning, nutrition. So pretty much it.
So backing up a little bit, we'll go back to young Sam. What was kind of like, what made you kind of decide to join the U.S. Army? Like, what were your thoughts on that? And kind of what did you hope to gain out of it? Dude, yeah, the old historical question.
When I joined the military, yeah, I know, right? That's like, what made you want to join the military? So when I joined the military, I was in high school. This was not but maybe a few years after 9/11. And at that time, it was kind of, I don't want to say it was the thing to do, but it was almost like it was your duty. It was from a community-based perspective or from a societal perspective. It was not an obligation, but it definitely felt like, you love your community, you love your country. Let's go fight. It's more or less, at that age, you don't really know the intricacies. You don't know the details of everything. It's just kind of like, let's go fight. You got, Toby Keith in the background. I'll put a boot in your, it's like a whole bunch of stuff is, you got American flags waving everywhere.
Yeah. Eagles
throwing bread. Eagles are soaring. People are like throwing bread and vegetables at Dixie Chicks because they talk down to, about whatever, so it's this is the thing you do, this is, you support your nation, that sort of thing. And I think throughout the process of that, there had to be a serious sense of evolution. I was a kid that I wasn't a troublesome kid. I've never gotten in trouble with the law. Never, I never did drugs a day in my life. I never got in any kind of trouble realistically. But I needed an outlet. I needed something that because as a kid, I told myself I was going to be a professional athlete. I had already kind of garnered that mentality. This is where I was going to go to college at. This is where I was going to play a sport. And then beyond that, I'm going to go pro. That was everything to me as a kid. And my dad, he's like, hey, keep your head in the clouds, but let's also keep our feet on the ground as well and see what the options are out there. So, I grew up, I wrestled. Wrestling was something that I actually at first did not enjoy. I actually enjoyed playing basketball. I do not have the physical stature to be a good basketball player, but I enjoyed basketball. I was good at wrestling. I was bad at basketball, but I enjoyed basketball, and I just did not enjoy wrestling. However, as time progressed throughout high school, I was like, I understood the validity behind it. And so I told myself, like, I want to be a professional athlete. And that kind of started to fade out of my fingertips. I also like, small town USA. I'm a country boy. What's that?
What?
We're over here making faces. You guys can't see it, but
yeah.
No. So small town country boy. I didn't really know a whole lot outside of my small world. And again, the war just kind of took such a precedence, I think, through media and everything else, that this was kind of the obligation. Not, again, I don't want to use that. That's using that term a little loosely. Not the obligation, but it was definitely the thing that you did. And
it felt like the right thing to do.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I also would see a lot of, you and I, we grew up watching war movies as kids and stuff. And you always watch the part where all the guys went off to war, especially like World War II or Vietnam or whatever. And then the guys that couldn't actually get drafted. Imagine, like, your nation is forcing you to do this, and you still couldn't qualify under forced pretenses. And so a lot of the guys that got left behind or that couldn't go out to this war, they couldn't participate. There was like a sense of worthiness that kind of degraded within them. And they were just kind of like, yeah, they didn't feel worthy enough. And then when all the guys came back from the war, you saw there was a lot of psychological conflict with some of the guys that stayed behind. They were kind of like, I wish I'd have done this and I could have done that, or whatever it may be. And in fact, there was actually a spike, and again, correlation is not always causation, but there was a correlated spike in suicide rate amongst the males that were left behind due to that psychological depression. So I think that was also something in my head. Like, I didn't want to be that guy, because I knew there was a huge influx of males and females that were out there fighting. And I just didn't want to be that guy that was like, well, I wish I could have, or I should have, or I passed the prime years of being able to do this. And I wanted to see what was out there. So 17 and a half years old, I joined the Army. I had actually started out as a 52 Charlie, which is a MOS that doesn't exist anymore. It was a air conditioner and generator mechanic. And way my recruiter, a lot of people don't know that. I started out and I was a reservist. And when I had started out, the way my recruiter had kind of sold it to me was, hey, look, man, you live in the Southeast. Now, I will say AC business down here is massive. Like, if you can own an AC company in the Southeast, you're making bank. It's guaranteed that you're going to have a good life and longevity of a career. So the way it kind of proposed it to me was like, you should get into being an AC mechanic. And back then, the two MOSs were combined. You did generator mechanics. So I'd started in reserves doing that. And I had gotten to my reserve unit, and I was about 6 months into that. And I had realized, like, there's a whole war going on. And I'm sitting here, worrying about CFC laws, and that I don't have a whistleblower because I accidentally leaked some CFCs into the air or something. It's like there's literally a whole conflict going on, and I have to worry about some, something as minuscule as that, or at least to me, it felt minuscule.
Yeah.
So I reclassed and went active duty, and it's pretty much where it went from there. I made a lot of mistakes along the way. I was not the most ideal soldier. I wasn't the perfect soldier. I definitely was not like a, toes to the line kind of guy. I think for me, what I realized, the military requires a specific individual, and we're talking about long term, requires an individual of a good sense of flexibility. And I don't want to say like moral flexibility. There is maybe some of that, but there is a sense of flexibility that an individual must have to do this as a career.
Yeah.
And at that time and at that age, I did not have that flexibility mentally. I was very much into discipline. I was very much into, do the right thing kind of deal. But my mentality was a little bit different than what the Army thought was the right thing. And that's okay. It's just a conflict of mentality. And my way at that time definitely was not 100% correct. I don't feel like neither was the Army's, but it's one of those things to where it was, you took what you could from it. You learned a lot from it. I would never take that away. If I could go back and do it all over again, I'd 110% do it. And in fact, knowing what I know now, I'd have followed a more efficient route than what I did.
Yeah.
But for me, I've never, and I'll tell you, let me preface with this. I'm a big fan of following ethical and moral, strong, structured Christian. And as you and I, we all three of us we all believe that through Christ alone, faith alone, that is how we're saved. Yep. So I've always prefaced, I tell everybody that I'm a Christian. I love Jesus. Sometimes I have a cussing problem, but outside of that, I 100% try and follow as best as I can as a disciple of Christ. But to me, from a Christian perspective, I'm all about following authority and doing what needs to be done. So I wanted to preface with that before I say this. The military requires a yes man. And I think for some of us that we enjoyed what we did, we were not necessarily cut out to be yes men, at least to some aspects of, the worldview, the secular worldview. And our worldview, guys like you and I, our worldview is a little bit different because our principles are deep rooted and founded upon something a little bit different. So I think for me, it's what caused me to get out. I had actually put my packet in to go a little bit further. I wanted to go to sniper school. I put a packet in. I did LRM, which I think they did away with that. Which now back then it was called long range marksmanship course.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like a pre-course, long range course. So you went over stuff like target detection, a lot of the typical things that you go over throughout sniper school. I put in a packet for sniper school after that. It got denied. We were down at that time. I was doing it as a re-enlistment package. So I went to retention. I said, hey, look, this is my PT score. I score well. I've done everything good. I passed all RM. I've done EIB, all this stuff. I've made good grades throughout the entire process of this. I want to re-enlist, but I wanted to re-enlist on a sniper package. And back then the military was making budget cuts, like really hardcore. I watched guys' futures get put on chopping blocks because of that. And I just kind of realized I didn't want to get halfway into retirement and then because of that and not know the outcome. And then also not get what I was seeking in that retention packet. I ended up cutting ties. And so got out of the military and decided to not opt for a second contract at that point. Technically, this would have been a third contract, but I didn't want to opt for another contract at that point, more or less because of the political aspect of what was going on. I didn't want my future to be put on chopping block.
Yeah. After
I'm already halfway to retirement. And this isn't to be, I don't know how much we talked about. We're not as PC here, but I will say from a hierarchy perspective, I did not fully agree with kind of where the administration was going with stuff as far as how they were doing with the military and things to that degree. So I ended up cutting ties and just kind of saying, hey, it was great. I kept the relationships. And just like anywhere else, there were guys I didn't get along with too,
Right.
but the guys that I did end up having really close relationships with and really good friendships with, those are bonds that here we are. I've been out now for a decade, and it has been, it's tighter now than it was then, in my opinion. So
yeah.
I think it's been a great experience. Learned a lot, was in combat there, with the 501st, gained a lot of experience for that. So yeah, I mean, that's why I joined. It was because it's what you do. And I was also curious. I mean, it was like this, you see the documentaries and the video footage they always put out by recruiters, and I'm like, man, that looks super cool. Dudes walking through with face paint, and you're in the jungle and you're doing all this cool stuff and everything else, and shooting machine guns, and I mean, all that stuff just appealed to me.
Yeah.
And it was cool. I enjoyed, as far as the training alone, take the politics out of it, take the, I say this loosely, authoritarian nature out of it. The job itself was an absolute blast. I loved every second of it. Some guys didn't like being airborne. I enjoyed it. I liked jumping out of airplanes. My probably one of my closest friends, he was best man at my wedding. You know who he is.
Oh,
I don't know if we can name drop him. That's my buddy. He's best man at my wedding. I was best man at his. He sees that training aspect on the whole opposite end of the spectrum. He hated jumping out of airplanes. He just didn't like being airborne, and more power to him. But I loved jumping out every single jump. And people say, well, it gets old. It gets monotonous after you do so many. And I would say, like, lugging all that stuff around, maybe, but jumping out was a blast to me, and I enjoyed every ounce of it. But, it's the other stuff, I think, surrounding it that kind of convoluted the, if you like something, you're going to keep doing it. Right?
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I definitely would have kept doing it, but I think it was the surrounding stuff that convoluted it so much that I just said, hey, it was great. It's time to get out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, like, when you get to that point where you're, cause we're both, or all three of us were enlisted, you get to that point where you're E4 promotable and you're starting to kind of see it on the other side of the curtain, so to speak, which you're seeing in there well before that. But when it comes time where they're like, you need to go to the board and, blah, 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 and they start just sending you down trying to push you into the grooming process, if you will. And you start realizing, like, oh, they don't want critical thinkers here at all. They don't want people that can, come to their own conclusions, and and it's just the reality of it. And that's why you see so many people that I think could have been incredible leaders and incredible soldiers and actually benefited, that our military could have actually benefited from. I think that's why you see so many of them leave, because it's a bunch of things. I think it's a major problem our military has, especially now. I think there's a big disconnect between true leadership and what the military wants out of leaders, which is basically follow this to the T. Don't shake anything up, don't do anything like that. Yeah. So it's
that's where I was going with that, but I was trying to say it in like the nicest roundabout way. It's
call them out.
It's not the military is not designed, and I do want to kind of recant what I stated in regards to flexibility. I was not mentally flexible to go in the direction the Army wanted me to go to.
Yeah.
Versus I'm wholly flexible as far as evolution is concerned. I 100% believe in evolving. Something you and I and Steven talked about literally just a minute ago was that because of the dogmatic nature of the military, it loses its ability to evolve, at least at the rate that it could. Right. I'm watching now, and even in my most recent deployment just a few years ago, that the military is just now starting. And we're talking, I was tasked with SOF. So we're talking SOF units are almost just, I don't say almost, some of them are now on par a lot more with what I'm seeing in civilian sectors. Like, I'm watching civilian practitioners running high-speed material, not just gear, but actual methodologies and training principles and that level of flexibility. And I think that is probably what helps SOF a lot, is they do have a little more flexibility than your conventional fighting forces.
Right.
Is because of that flexibility, they can R&D, they can play around, they can see what works, what doesn't work, they can try out different gear and material. So it's given them that ability. It's like looking at the SIG rifle. This isn't the first time SIG has been in experimentation through SOF. But the regular conventional fighting forces just hadn't seen that yet. And I think that's what helps SOF, but it's almost like the rest of the military, just it takes so long for them to catch up.
Yeah.
And I think seeing that for me was like, because, you and I, we were already practitioners outside of the military. We were doing a lot of stuff on our own volition. Like we were out there training and stuff and just collecting as much data and information on the civilian side of it and going, why isn't our units implementing this? Why is our platoons and our companies and our battalions not doing some of these things? And I was realizing just like how far behind the curve the Army was. And it's wild because our fighting forces light years above where a lot of other fighting forces are, but we were still so far behind to our potential. And that was the biggest thing for me, was realizing kind of how outdated and antiquated that the military had kind of became. And I realized that in order for me to evolve without going the soft direction was to get out and start pretty much trying to train myself and work on that through research and development.
Yeah. I mean, I remember back, when we were all still in, I mean, you had like me, you, and guys like Reggie who were going out and training, doing competition shooting on our own time. That's what we were doing for fun on the weekends and stuff like that. And then literally coming back to our units and then going to a range session and doing like super check the box ready ups and stuff like that. And then you literally had, E4s like telling staff sergeants like, hey, we should try these speed reload drills. And they're like, that's stupid. That's not how we do it. We got to retain our mags. And we're like, and it's not as fast. And then I remember telling my staff sergeant, I was like, if you can beat me, if anybody here in my platoon can beat me, then I'll listen to you. But if not, then we should implement it. And he actually took me up on it. And of course, he got smoked because he was doing the most Army doctrinal reload you could do, which was not actually focused on getting the gun up quickly. It was focused on, let's retain this piece of U.S. Army equipment, which is a freaking, $7 magazine. Like, who cares about that? Yeah. And we have literally thousands of them back at the barracks. And, you know, and so, and then we do it and he sees it and he's like, okay, actually, let me see that again. Like, how do you do that? And it's like, is it teachable? It's like, yeah, roger that. Check it out. It's actually way more teachable than the method you've been trying to teach us. Like, open your flap, pull the mag out, put the, and it was just ridiculous. So, and that's one example of how just a couple of guys who were pursuing things outside of that dogmatic perspective of like, we do it this way because that's the way it's done, could actually make an influence. And if they allowed that to happen in mass, I think we'd have a much better military. And I think that's why you see such progression in the SOF community, or the SOCOM community, because they're able to do that. They have a little more freedom to kind of seek out. They can bring in instructors where needed. They have the funding. So kind of to your point, and I think this is kind of where you're headed with it, is that as a civilian, we have the benefit of cherry picking, and we are accountable to ourselves, so to speak. So we can literally be like, what makes the most sense for me as a practitioner in this area, or a modern Minuteman, or just a responsible citizen, whatever you want to call it. What do I need to fulfill my requirements to better safeguard my family and community? And I think that's a pretty cool thing. Obviously you have to take advantage of it and use it the right way, but it's cool because it's a double-edged sword. I think it can, you have the freedom to be lazy as well. And I think that's where you kind of can start getting into the fitness aspect a little bit, because you start to see like, well, no one's holding me accountable. I'm not being forced to this standard by like an institution. It's all on me. And so, yeah,
Right.
it can be a blessing and a curse, you know, and it's all about your mindset, I believe. But yeah.
You know, it's funny you bring up the shooting aspect of, hey, you know, in my off time, in my off duty as a soldier, we would go out, we'd train, we'd compete, we tested ourselves. You know, we were doing a lot of R&D personally,
Yep.
trying to see what works and finding more proficient routes from a shooting aspect. But that's also how I felt with fitness.
Yeah.
And I saw that in the military, and I had guys, I literally had the same, I won't say verbatim the same words, but I had a very similar conversation with some of my leadership that had the physical fitness of a 91-year-old man. And I'm like, look, man, like there's your sense of proficiency here and your capabilities in a battlefront or in a warlike setting, to me, is it's not where it needs to be. And
yeah.
they would continue to run physical training or PT in a particular format that guys have just been doing for the last 70 years. And they go, well, it's the way we've always done it. This is the way we should keep doing it. And that's the way they would approach physical fitness. And it absolutely bothered me. And it's funny because when it came down to combatives time, you know, we would do, for those that don't know, you know, the Army has their own martial arts program. It's called combatives. It's heavily relegated to grappling. A lot of jiu-jitsu and wrestling involved in that. But and then the Marine Corps has their own version. I think it's called McMap. But it's a similar grappling format that most of us get some kind of introductory to. I will say one of the positive things with our platoon, one of our squad leaders was, I believe at the time, he was a brown belt, jiu-jitsu brown belt. So he was really adamant about us rolling as much. And so we would do that for PT at least twice a week, which I think is a good baseline. Where I would say is, you know, you can't do combatives once a month and then go, well, I'm prepared to, you know, to roll as a primate. Like you can't, you're not going to be able to. And so we did it twice a week. And you would watch, like I had guys that were able to run, you know, sub 13-minute 2 miles, but they would just get utterly destroyed in grappling. And it was like, and, you know, I had guys that were, most of us, some other guys in our platoon, friends of mine, we wrestled at Fort Richardson. When we came back from deployment, we joined a wrestling team that was there on Fort Richardson. And, you know, I don't know if you remember, all of our battalions had little teams that we had kind of developed. We had a softball team, the DECO had come up with, and we also had a wrestling team, and it was actually just two of us, me and another guy, which I won't name on here. Him and I talk a lot. He was a super heavyweight. And we wrestled for our battalion, and we really enjoyed it. But I would watch guys in the combatives program, you know, the sub 13-minute mile guy was just getting waxed, and he realized that his aerobic capacity for running didn't necessarily translate so well to his anaerobic and partially aerobic. But fighting is highly anaerobic. It's not as just, we'll talk about it later, but it's not as efficiently as aerobic as possible. So you think like, well, I'll just run 10 miles every day and that'll just help my fight cardio. And your fight cardio is not just aerobic capacity. And so these guys who had a phenomenal aerobic capacity, they were marathon runners, that probably one of our guys probably could have been an ultra marathon runner, which is just beyond any aerobic capacity that the average person is going to be able to have. And he was gassing out. Now, part of that's technique and efficiency of skill, but the other part of it is understanding your energy systems, and they didn't have it. And so I would try and preach to these guys, like, we need to be having a different sense of physical fitness. We're not marathon runners. We're not bodybuilders. We're not like whatever. They would just randomly concoct something up. Like, we're going to run 10 miles today, but then tomorrow we're going to do 100 reps of squats with dudes on our backs. And it was like, there's validity to both, but you need to know the science behind why and what you're doing. Don't just do something because, you know, the NCO before you did it, and that's why you should just do it. And that was the issue that I would find. And I was watching my body take the beating and breakdown from the ignorance of physical fitness, and as well seeing it from the shooting side of things. I mean, guys were holding M4s like they were serving a pizza. It's like,
Yeah.
you and I were like C clamping or thumbs forward, like in the early days before,
Yeah.
before Costa Ludus blew up and Haley blew up. I mean, we're talking like early days of like the art of dynamic shooting, that whole, like the early days when that first dropped and everything. We were already like, hey, we need to throat this gun as much as possible. Meanwhile, guys are like serving pizza with an M16, or they were like magazine cupping and
doing the MP5 hold on the M4.
Yeah, man. And it was like, that was the other thing too. I'm like, dude, you guys are out here like just putting the end of your rail on your hand like it's on a table or something. And it's like, dude, you guys are way so far behind. And that was another aspect. And I was like, all right, it was great. And you do learn a little bit of mental toughness. I think the biggest thing, and you would agree with me, would be like learning to put up with crap that you were just kind of like, this is dumb, but I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
And to your point, you lose some of that discipline when you get out, because you're like, I don't want to do this, but I'm gonna do it. And people look at me and they think, that guy must love working out. I work out 6 days a week. One of those 6 days I like. The other 5 I don't enjoy always being there. I like the progress that it gives me. I like the capacity and capabilities that it gives me, but I don't always like doing the work in the moment. So, I mean, yeah, I agree with you. And I think another thing that you and I took back from that too was the combat experience was a good thing. I do think that it helped us in other aspects of our life. But aside from that, man, I was like, look, we can do a way better system with this if I was given the freedom and capacity to do so. And so, to your point, when we got out, man, that's you and I both went in that direction. We strived. We had talked about this pretty early on. For anybody that doesn't know, we had frostbite weapon craft. It was like early days. Early days. We had a little team.
Oh yeah, we dust off the history books.
We were training. We were teaching local folks in our community, even people from our own units. We were actually bringing in to help kind of do some of this learning with us, and they were learning and then taking it back to the unit. And so it really gave us a good stepping stone to kind of move forward, because we knew we love this stuff. We knew that it was necessary, that it was needed, but we also knew that it needed to evolve way beyond what the military could offer. And I think that's the reason why guys like you and I, we get out and we go in the direction that we go into.
Yeah, it's pretty cool looking back at that, because I personally owe so much of my entrepreneurial drive and kind of the I guess in a way the foundations of some of our experience to that. Those is as goofy as it may seem looking back at it, those frostbite weaponcraft days, because it was me, you, and Reggie that kind of headed it up and would design courses and organize and put it together. And then all three of us now have our own companies. You have DAGR Management, Reggie has Pride One Tactics, and then obviously I'm part of Dynamic Defense Solutions. And so it's kind of cool looking back at that and then looking where we all collectively are now, owning our own businesses in this space. It's kind of neat, especially since we all have been kind of pushing towards this since then. But on that, actually, it's a good segue. So obviously you got out of the military. You were actually living in Alaska. You've since obviously moved down to East Coast area, down in North Carolina. You started DAGR Management. You kind of talked about how it was a security company, and you kind of deviated from that. So what is DAGR Management, and kind of what does DAGR Management offer? Yeah.
So with DAGR Management, what we primarily offer is everything from basic pistol all the way up to advanced. So that's a 4-level course. Basic carbine up to advanced, that's a 4-level course as well. Trauma should be dropping here in the next month or so. I just finished building the curriculum for that. I'm also an FFL SOT dealer. So for those that don't understand those nomenclatures, we sell, procure, trade firearms as well as NFA items. So hopefully I will say my 2-year goal, probably sooner than that, is we'll also be having um, a, a section off to the side of the shop. We're actually going to have a place here. For those who don't know, I'm in North Carolina. So we're within our town here, the town of Bunn is our current location. Within Bunn, we'll have a grappling school as well. So we're going to try and focus on pretty much it's submission grappling. We will obviously incorporate folk style freestyle wrestling as well as some Greco-Roman stuff, but it's primarily going to be things like jiu-jitsu and judo. We will be offering a jiu-jitsu program, obviously solely just jiu-jitsu. But as a grappling practitioner myself, I've found that combining a lot of other grappling arts together it's the best way to go. So we will be a submission fighting school as well. Jiu-jitsu is great, and we'll get into that later if you want to. Jiu-jitsu is great. It's a great, I think, grappling art that does its best at combining as much other grappling arts together into one. But I think some schools, some subsets of each grappling art specialize a little more in one thing or the other. So this premise of what I want to do for our school is pure submission fighting. So it's going to be everything grappling combined. I will say that's supposed to be what jiu-jitsu is. It's kind of changed a little bit in its sport format recently, but our goal is to offer jiu-jitsu, judo, wrestling. So that's within our semi-immediate to long-term goal, to have that in Bonn here.
That's awesome.
So yeah.
Sweet. Well, cool, man. Yeah, I'm excited for you guys to get into the submission fighting and like the grappling school. I think that stuff is just so vital too, and that's an area that I haven't rolled and trained jiu-jitsu in a long time. I did that. I was level 3 combatives in the Army, and then did some jiu-jitsu at one of the gyms up in Anchorage. But for a while, but since I've been down here, it's not been something I've done. And then I know Steven used to train down here quite a bit. But it's been a long time for both of us.
Yeah, it's pretty short lived for me just because of work schedule and stuff. I was working construction at the time, and I was working like 18-hour days and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, it'd be awesome to, whenever you get that up and running, have you back on and just do a full episode on that. Cause that's something too, like, grappling skills, I think, are, especially for just practical defense, I think it's just a given. Like it should be worked on.
Right.
So, but cool, dude. Well, kind of getting into fitness, we'll go ahead and start getting into the meat and potatoes here. Maybe we'll leave out the potatoes, but but on mindset, I think mindset's a great place to start, because that's something that for me personally, I can speak from my own experience. That's been the biggest hurdle for me, especially in my, I guess my like mid to late 20s. I just didn't have the right mindset to pursue it consistently. And then recently I've changed. I've been able to have a healthier mindset involving fitness in mass. So yeah, I felt like mindset's a good place to start, but
yeah. So I think, like, to me, physical fitness should be at the helm of it. In fact, so I have tenets that I follow that I've put out for you guys that don't know. I have a podcast as well for those that are listening. And I have specific tenets that I put out, mindset being at the top of that tenet. But right behind that is physical fitness. And I would even say they both feed off of each other very drastically. And in fact, in my level of prioritization, fitness is it's relegated almost in the hierarchy above pistol shooting, carbine shooting, learning comms and bushcraft. Those things are extremely important by a long stretch of everything else. To me, fitness needs to be at the top of that in regards to hierarchy. And I will say that the reason that is because it feeds into and makes everything else so much more efficient in what you do. I see a lot of guys on social media, YouTube and things, and they're running a lot of all this gigantic kit, right? A lot of stuff, like we're talking like a recon build out, and they've got this giant, all these stacked out mags, all this gear, all this, everything that's you can possibly imagine that you would need for, a LERP unit or something that requires you to do long range reconnaissance patrolling. But they don't have the physical fitness behind it to then have to, like, hey man, you got to hump this stuff for the next 6 to 12 miles. And a good quarter of that is probably uphill, or depending upon where you live. North Carolina has a little bit of everything. We've got the mountains, we've got swamps, we've got plains, we've got beaches. You guys have beaches, you guys have a lot of mountains. It's cold, it's austere. So like when the elements are very tasking to you, physical fitness goes a long ways. Yep. And what I have found is that if your body, there's an old Stoic quote that goes, hard body equals a hard mind. A strong body makes a strong mind. And to a certain degree, I would agree, right? And there are a lot of people that run on willpower alone. For those that are very familiar with guys like David Goggins, they're all about like the mental state of things and pure willpower and things. But at the same time, guys like Goggins are also prime athletes in their particular fields, and that's what they do. We're talking about guys who do, if like Badwater, which is an ultra marathon in Las Vegas. It runs right through Death Valley. We're talking 100 miles. You have to run 100 miles in 24 hours. And that is just like, for those that just don't understand,
it's crazy.
Not because there's so much, like, physically, there's only but so much that you can prepare for when you're talking about pushing your body to that degree. And then the mentality that it takes afterwards, like just to tell your body, take one more step, take one more step, take one more step. It is literally the neurological drive to tell your body, just keep going.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the wheels and you can't actually do it to begin with, or you don't even have the capacity to do any of this, you can run on will all you want to, but once your body breaks down, it breaks down. There's nothing left. Like if your patella tendon snaps in the middle of a ultra marathon or whatever, there's no like willing your soft connective tissues to just start moving. Like there is, your synapses is not making a neurological drive to any muscular contraction at that point because there's no connection. There's literally no physical connection. Yeah. So you can run on will all you want to. And I think I will say that's something that in the civilian sector that is not as pushed as hard, that in the military, it's like, embrace the suck and drive on. We use a lot of these terms a lot. Yeah. But it's very true. I think within the civilian sector, that is something that's very much lost, is the mental capacity to literally tell yourself one more step, just one more step. And the thing is, you have to literally believe it to keep doing that over and over again to get to the end goal. But if you don't have the connective tissue and capacity to actually do it, doesn't matter what your brain tells your body. If there's no neurological drive, then you're not going to make an eccentric concentric contraction in the muscle. You can't actually do it. Right. So they go hand in hand, very, very much so. And when you train, Dan Gable, for those that don't know, Dan Gable is considered one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. He went high school and college. He was almost undefeated. He lost one match. It was his very last match to Owens. And Dan Gable, he also coached for Iowa Hawkeyes. He was an Olympic gold medalist, just real prominent wrestler. You got guys like that. And he has a real prominent quote that I really like. And I think it's important to understand, like, this isn't just antiquated to wrestling, but it should be antiquated to just hard training in general. But he states once you've wrestled, everything else is easy. And I disagree, because I would say, when you're in the military, you go through a lot of arduous stuff as well.
Yeah.
But the point that I think we should extrapolate from that is that because wrestling is very arduous, it's extremely tough. You're in there, you turn the AC off. It's hot, especially in the Southeast. Literally, if you've ever walked, especially on a D1 level, you walk into some of these gyms and the air is so thick from the humidity and the moisture that's just coming off your body, you can barely see beyond 10 feet in front of you. You got moisture, you have literal humidity just dripping off the walls, just how much and the doors are closed and you're in there and you're literally fighting another human being for hours, and you're just going. And so it's extremely arduous, extremely physically tasking. What that does mentally is and especially when you're talking about in a fighting capacity, we're not just talking, this is nothing to steady state guys like, marathoners. That's once you get into a steady state like that, you're just telling yourself just one more step, just one more step, just one more step. But now when you relegate that to a fighting capacity, the mental state, the mindset that it takes is not just one more step. It's now you're playing chess while you're extremely exhausted, right? And so you're telling yourself, I need to gain head positioning. I need to make sure that I have a good hand fighting techniques and that I can gain wrist control, and that they don't have wrist control on me. And you're constantly trying to put pressure out while receiving pressure, and you're overtly exhausted. The mental state that takes is insane. And I will say that it's not just relegated to wrestling. Wrestlers will think that it is because that's all they've experienced. But we saw this a lot in the military where we would be absolutely exhausted, right? We're going 24, 48 hours off of not sleeping. We've hardly eaten anything. And now I've got to complete a land nav course that is, miles long. And then I've got cadre between here and there that are set up throughout the woods just to trick me, just to try and make me fall to the softer side of things that are, and they're going to do spot checks and make sure I got my compass and make sure I'm doing the right thing. Or, you might have a drill sergeant or a cadre sitting off in the woods pretending that they're an actual student just like you are and going, hey man, you want to just take a nap for a little bit? You kind of want to relax. And that back part of your brain is like, man, this sounds really good. I could get away with a 10-minute nap and then get back on this course. Or you're looking at the map and you see you're not following where you should go, but you see kind of a little cutoff in the woods, and you're like, man, I think I could get away with going around this parking lot. Or, those temptations creep in. So I think in the military we experience that as well. So it's not just relegated to wrestling, in my opinion, but, it's a famous quote from a wrestler. With that being stated, when you have taught yourself to push to your absolute limit, to where you're completely exhausted, and then you have to think at a pretty intricate level continuously over a course of time, the mindset that it takes for that, it's not normal. It's by human standards, it is not just an average thing that you think you can just wake up and achieve. Yeah. So the mindset that comes from physical fitness is that when your body is a lot more prepared for something, it makes it more efficient to just go through something that's grueling. Plus, when you train all the time, you're in a constant state of discomfort.
Yeah.
I've made it a rule that, you and I have talked about, we've had certain tenets that we kind of put ourselves to. Like for me, it's like read a book once a month. That's like a thing for me, right? I read Admiral McCraven's book, Make Your Bed. And it's weird because when I got out of the military, there were a handful of things that I said, I'll never do again. I'm never shaving my face. I'm not going to do hospital corners anymore. I'm not doing any of that bull crap. I'm not, so like you kind of go through that. And so for years, I didn't make my bed. I would just like leave it messed up, or maybe I'd pull the sheet and the blanket up, just leave it there and whatever. Because it's like, what does it matter? I'm going to hop in this bed again at the end of the day. And for those that haven't read this book, it's a really good book. He also has several others I really enjoy. Sea Stories is another one. But he's got a book called Make Your Bed, and it's based on a speech that he gave. He's an alumni, and he gave to college graduates. And I won't give it away, but the premise is you're doing something you don't want to do. And so I've used that. I make my bed now every day, and I do it to like military standard. My wife actually told me first thing this morning, she goes, I don't know if I ever told you this, but I really love the way you make the bed. And she's like a stickler for like cleanliness. She's super OCD about it, and it's really crisp, and I hold it to a high standard. And but the reason I'm saying that is because one of those tenets is doing something every day that I don't want to do. No matter what that might be. It might be, maybe it is making your bed. Maybe it's, going out and doing physical fitness. Maybe it's eating right, whatever it may be, something that you don't want to do every day. I have a whiteboard. It's like daily task, weekly task, monthly task, and then a long-term task. At the top of it, it says, every day, do something you don't want to do. And the mental capacity that I have to tell myself, even though it seems minute at the time, you have to do something you don't want to do. And a lot of us don't want to push ourselves and grind ourselves. Now, after a time of creating that habit, it just kind of becomes routine and habit in nature. So for me, physical fitness isn't one of those things. There are moments where like I said earlier, I don't want to always do it in the moment, but it's one of those things where it's not as discomforting anymore. So now I have to find something else to where it's, I don't want to do this one thing. Maybe that's, again, I don't know. For some people, it might be cooking breakfast. They don't want to cook breakfast. So you go cook your breakfast, whatever it may be. So physical fitness, I think for a lot of the average people that are out there in society, physical fitness is that. And that it will become that for a long time until you've really become adaptive and habitual with it. So the mental capacity that it takes to do something you don't want to do, and it's exhaustive, and you're not just going to feel it in the moment, you'll also feel it a few hours afterwards and maybe even the next day and things to that degree. So that constant state of discomfort, I think, allows you mentally, in the mindset perspective, it mentally allows you to be okay with not always needing to be comfortable and being in the best position that I want to be in. Yeah. So it aids mindset in those regards drastically.
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic advice. And I think I really like that you have that, and that's something that I actually might implement. I like the idea of every day you go out of your way to do something you're not comfortable doing, because our society is set up for instant gratification, and our society is also obsessed with comfort. It's all about like the least amount of effort, stay as comfortable as possible. And it's something Steven and I talk about a lot, because I think going back to, your example of the military does do a good job at making you constantly uncomfortable. And that's something that I always attribute back to the military. I'm thankful for that side of it. There's a lot I'm thankful for. And I again, much like you, I wouldn't change those experiences. But something I really got to give a thumbs up to the Army on was like, man, they made us okay with discomfort. And even to this day, like there's things that I'll be doing and everyone around me is complaining, and there's a little thing in the back of my head that's like, why is this a big deal? But you don't realize it's like, man, you're okay with discomfort, and this discomfort's annoying to someone that has always had the option of, well, I could do this or I could be comfortable. And, I think that doesn't have anything to do with military service. I'm just saying from my experience that, right, informed that for me, and it's helped me personally. But if you're able to do it on your own, and if you're able to go on your own volition and be like, hey, I'm going to pick something daily that I don't want to do and do it just because it's good for me. And, you might learn something and you're going to have better resolve for it. You're going to be more mentally tough. That's fantastic. I think it's great advice. And I think it's something that we as a culture or community need to be more okay with pursuing. It's the little things like, working out every day sucks. I'm not going to lie. I don't like it. Like I wake up early and there's always that moment of like, I'm just going to skip this. And sometimes I do, and it's like, but having the resolve to be like, nope, I need to do it. I need to do this for my family. I need to do this for my community, because just like you said, all this other stuff that we all work on, if you're a mess and you're physically unfit and you can't pick up a 80-pound ruck and put it on and go, or I can't pick Steven up and haul him out because his legs don't work anymore. Like, if I can't do that, or I can't grab all of my kids and run upstairs with them to run away from a fire or whatever it is, it's like, these are the things I think we need to be thinking about. And for me personally, having kids was the big awakener of like, you're soft and flabby, and it's time to get your mind and body right, because these kids can't do it without you, and it's my job to protect them and protect my wife. And, you know, I'm the stronger vessel in the household, and it's on me. There's no one else coming. Like, it's not like I can, you know,
right.
And, you know, I'll be damned if I'm going to call another man and be like, come save us. You know, it's like, no, this is my responsibility. Exactly. And so, yeah, that mentality leads you to realize it's like, well, this sucks, but I got to do it. It's got to be done. And it's actually been even just like mentally, not necessarily mindset, but just mentally, like having clarity and just like breathing better, just little physical things. You start to feel better. You know, there's a lot that just comes from just being willing to be uncomfortable. And I think going to more of that training aspect, you know, when you're talking about, you know, hey, if you're listening to this podcast, maybe you're one of those people that's kind of putting all the pieces together and you like to go out and practice tactics, and you've got a team, you've got a group, you know, whatever the case may be. It's like, it's the little details of like, hey, put a freaking 8-mile ruck in the middle of your training. Put you know, stop in between drills and knock out some push-ups. That's something Steven's really good about. We'll just be like shooting on the range, and all of a sudden I turn around and I'm like, where'd Steven go? And I look down and he's just like knocking out push-ups. And I'm just like, he's like, man, I had to get the blood flowing or something.
I was about to say, it's usually because I'm cold is why. Dude, North Carolina ruined me, man. I get cold on the range all the time. So I'm like, dude, I got to do some push-ups right now to get the blood flowing. But I think to piggyback on what you're saying, Jacob, is ultimately, like, obviously your motivation is your kids and your family and your community. I think ultimately, like, in order for someone to stick to a physical routine, or like not just working out, but also eating right, you got to find the motivation of why you want to stay on that path. And everyone's motivation is going to be a little different. It's going to be, you know, very dependent on what you prioritize. So I think ultimately finding that motivation is like the number one step to like kind of changing your lifestyle. Because if you don't have a motivation to stick to it, you're not going to stick to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So here's something.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Oh, all I was going to say is I think, you know, I agree with that. And when you said everybody's motivation is different, I immediately thought of like, you know, a lot of, especially younger men, their motivation is like, I want to be physically attractive and I want to look really good. Because appearance and how other people in society perceive you is important to a younger man, you know. That's just how most men are wired. And that's, I like to use this example because for me, that was never a big deal. So I've never been motivated by how I physically look. I married the hottest woman in the world and young, and I was like, I bagged a 10 and, you know, locked that in. And, also I've just been really confident in who I am. And so that's never been a big driver for me. So unfortunately that was like, I had to find another why. And for me, it was having kids and realizing like, crap. And there's even, you know, there's videos you see all the time. Like I think maybe you shared this, Sam. Somebody shared it to their story and I think it was you. And I was like, dude, I couldn't imagine. And it was a video of a woman that was like pushing her baby stroller, and she was very like physically unfit. Did you share that one?
Oh, dude, I saw that one too.
And she loses control, and it's rolling out into traffic, and she falls over, and she's trying to get up, and she can't because she's so unfit that she literally can't get up. And thank God, a man runs in from off camera, you know, somewhere out
barely
of perspective,
in time,
and literally catches it before it rolls out into the highway. And throughout this whole interchange of time, she still can't get up, and they have to then come and help her up. And it's like, if you're that unfit that like if you fall over and it's going to take you, you know, nothing against that. I'm not trying to berate or talk bad about that individual. I have no idea who that was, but it's just that wake up call of like, if you're not physically fit, then you never know. Something could happen. Like what you said, you could literally tear a tendon and just collapse, and like you're not, because you're not fit, and you're not going to be able to do anything. You physically won't be able to, and that realization scared the crap out of me. And I had that realization a long time ago, but I'm just saying that video kind of brought it back home of like, dude, I could be way more fit than I am now, and it's up to me, So yeah.
I think that's huge, and I think the better word is know your why.
Yep.
I believe I think it was Nietzsche. I could be wrong on this, but maybe Friedrich Nietzsche is known for saying, "For if you know your why, your how will always be accomplishable." I'm paraphrasing. But your why is generally what drives a lot of the how. How am I going to do this? Well, you're going to find a way. You're going to figure out a way if your why is big enough. If that, and you guys use the word motivation, I think it's drive for me, what drives me. Because to be real, I'm not motivated a lot of the times when I want to go do this. Like, I'm like, I could go do this. I could go do that. I've got this project over here I want to go do. And the way I see it is it's hygiene. Right. This is physical fitness is hygiene. It needs to realistically be relegated as a hygienic activity. I would not, especially days in a row, but even if I did it one day, I'd feel like crap, but I would not brush my teeth. I was like, I need to brush my teeth. And if you just forgot that one day, you run your tongue across your teeth and you're like, God, I got a sweater on my teeth. I need to get rid of this. You just feel like trash, right?
Yeah.
So no one, I won't say no one, most people in Western civilization, at least in a civilized society, don't go multiple days without brushing their teeth.
Yeah.
And you feel like, God, I feel like garbage if I don't brush my teeth. So it's the same exact construct. And you brought up a good point earlier when, like, some people, they don't know what they don't know. And people live in a state of like horrid health that they don't realize how much better they could actually feel. And when you are fit and then you go back to like almost being in a bad state or like unfit, going back into an unfit territory of lifestyle, you start realizing like, holy cow, like, how did I live like this before? I got to get back to some semblance of fitness. And when you draw back from that, it helps you realize just how hard you were on your body. Dude, you've got one body. You've got this life that you're living on Earth. It's up to you. It's your personal responsibility to take care of this. You and I, and we can even approach this from a theological perspective for those listeners out there that are, and I'm speaking to our community as Christians as well, right? I grew up in heavily Christian community. My dad's a church pastor. I grew up in that, like, in a very heavy community for sure. And it's wild because I have seen I have seen that so many Christians, so many guys within our community of Christianity, they'll say, well, don't smoke, don't drink, your body's a temple, don't don't do drugs because your body's a temple, you got to take care of it. And meanwhile, it's like Golden Corral every Sunday afternoon, and then Wang's Kitchen hibachi every Friday night, and whatever, and so it's like these guys are in a constant caloric surplus. They're living sedentary lifestyles. They aren't doing anything to change any of it, but your body's a temple. Meanwhile, your arterial wall looks like the Berlin Wall. I mean, it's like, what are you doing to yourself? Your body's a temple. Okay, then that needs to be taken care of in a multifaceted construct as well.
Yeah.
I know that not everyone is listening is not a Christian, but I think it's important to call out your own camp too, And I think for us, from a theological perspective, taking that into account, the other side to that too is, and this is not knocking genders or whatever, but I think as men as well, fathers and husbands and things to that degree, I think it's important for us to note that as fathers especially, but as husbands as well, we have a duty to our family. We have a duty to protect our family. We have a moral obligation and a responsibility to protect and care for these individuals, and to do so to our best capabilities. That's what I believe God has granted us. That's what He's given us as a task. And to your point with the young lady, that her stroller had just taken off, and when it first had taken off, and she had realized it was only within a few feet of her. It wasn't really like, we're not talking like 20, 30, 40, 50 yards away from her.
Right.
When she first realized that it was just a few feet, and she could not create enough force of lift off of her own feet to get a few feet in front of her, as this stroller is literally just, we're talking like a stroller rolling. We're not, this isn't a 6.0 Mustang taking off, right? Like it's not a Greyhound coming out of the booth. It's like just a stroller that's rolling.
Yeah.
And this lady could not create enough force off the ground of her own body weight to move 5 to 10 feet to grab the stroller.
Well, in fact, that force that she created literally caused her to fall. It's like it's overstrained, and she fell trying to reach for the stroller.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely a pretty uncoordinated movement that happened with that whole thing. I actually saw the video too, but and it must have been from his story or something, because I was like, dude, it like, when I was watching, I was like, because I witnessed a like an electric wheelchair like that. I don't know if it had just a throttle that stuck or something, but I watched a lady go out into traffic and get hit on a
wow.
So like when I was watching that and I was just seeing all the cars passing, like they're not stopping for that stroller.
No,
I just know that for a fact, because I've seen that. I've seen that happen. I've seen a stroller someone in a scooter or not scooter, but a wheelchair just get plowed over.
Dude,
actually in Fayetteville, North Carolina is where it happened. But
yeah, it would definitely happen in Vietnam for sure.
Yeah.
Did she make
Bro,
it?
those that don't know,
dude, I don't know.
That's what we call Fayetteville.
I was like a couple lanes over, so I couldn't stop. Like we were literally in a highway.
Oh yeah.
So it's like you just kind of going with the traffic. Like, dude, I can't believe I just watched that happen.
Oh, that's crazy.
I don't know. I could be speculating, but I highly doubt she probably made it. And if she did, she walked. She went to the hospital for some serious stuff.
Yeah.
Well, she probably wasn't walking away, because she wasn't walking to begin with.
No, she didn't. She didn't go in walking, so she's probably not going out walking. That's for sure.
Hey man, it could have fixed her. I don't know.
Yeah. Miracle by car accident. Yeah.
Everything happens for a reason.
Hey man, God blinded Paul. It might just obliterate a chick on a hover round and get her up and walking, you know? So it happens.
Oh.
Alrighty.
Okay. Hover round, dude.
Yeah, man. You remember those old commercials at the end of like the commercials like, what are you doing for Disney? We're at Disney World, and they're like on the top of a mountain. They're like, hover around, hover around, hover around, hover around. It was like a. Dude, you remember those commercials? Oh man,
yeah, dude. Oh my god,
they're golden.
They are, dude. Commercials aren't what they used to be, man.
No, man, they live in your head forever now. It's wild. Like advertisement isn't what it used to be, but yeah, they make good memories.
Yeah. Anyways. Yeah.
We got derailed.
It happens.
No pun intended, but we got derailed off course there.
Yeah.
I think Steven was talking about.
Yeah,
what's that?
I don't even remember what we were talking about. We were just talking about mindset, I think, is what the topic we were talking about. But
you're talking about the why and how you got to have it kind of thing. And
yeah. I mean, if your why is big enough, the how-to is going to be, it's going to be accomplishable. You know, and I think that's huge for a lot of people. For us, again, and this isn't to, you know, kind of play into the whole gender game that's currently going on in society, but I think for us as men, fathers, husbands, you know, even brothers or sons, maybe you're a guy that is taking care of your mother. She was a single mother, or maybe she's a widow, or whatever it may be. But I think males of society you know, we have a moral obligation to realistically be responsible and take care of those around us. And if we're constantly a liability, we're not going to be able to do that to the best of our, to the most, in the most efficient route. And that's where you hear a lot of, like the old military terms is like, be an asset, don't be a liability. And that happens with people who are just physically unfit. They become liabilities to themselves and to those around them more so than an asset. If I have to constantly worry about you because, imagine in a pretty gnarly scenario, I got to worry about your blood glucose levels because you've put yourself in a type 2 diabetic state due to lifestyle choices.
Yeah.
I understand some things are genetic based, some things are stuff that is outside of the realm of control, but a vast majority of it, studies have proven this over time and time again, the vast majority of the issues that are tasking the healthcare system and our health in general is really due to lifestyle choices.
Yeah. So. Yeah, man. I mean, that's so true. And I think it's, it's avoidable. And,
right.
And I think, you bring up the kind of the gender, which it's an unpopular opinion, but I would echo kind of your sentiment there and agree that it is man's responsibility. I think that's how God designed it, and I believe that's even biblical. And even if you don't believe that way, you can see this to be true. I mean, it's just kind of how it's structured, and there's physical, that's informed by just physical ability. It's also informed by just the level of confidence. It's very different. That's not to say that women can't be absolute beasts, because I've met some women that are just straight tanks, and you're like, dude, you could probably give me a run for my money, but there's always exceptions to the rule, basically, advice on both sides, but generally I think I would agree. And then also, if you're, you brought up being a husband, father, and kind of in that aspect, if I know we have a lot of younger people that listen to the podcast, that doesn't mean, that can still be your why, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If you don't have a wife yet, you don't have kids yet, but you plan to one day, or you hope to one day, start that now. Start working towards being the best man that you can be. And I think the discipline it takes and the effort it takes to be mentally and physically fit is, like you said, it's at the pinnacle. It should be the apex. Everything else can be built on that foundation. So, and it's going to be stronger. I mean, if you can kind of reverse engineer it. That's something that I've had to do, is kind of build back down and go and reinforce my foundation, because I did prioritize other things before fitness and have prioritized other things before fitness. But ultimately you need it, especially as you get older. I've noticed too, like, you start slowing down, your metabolism starts to crash. You have to, if you didn't work on it before, it's going to be harder to work on it when you're older. So the older you get, the harder it gets, unless you're able to maintain, it doesn't mean it gets any easier, but if you already have that good foundation of fitness, it's obviously going to be easier for somebody that starts their fitness journey at 39 years old, so. Yeah.
I don't know if it's something I say a lot. I don't know if it's a term that I coined or not, or if it's something someone else coined, but it's something that really I say a lot to a lot of the guys within our age frame or older. And I generally say that exercise is wasted on the young and needed by the old. And it's a very important thing, because, you brought up the point earlier, like, for a lot of young guys, their drive or their motivation could be aesthetics, right? The physical appearance of themselves, and, hey, I want to build symmetry and aesthetically be a muscular individual. And it tends to drive them to be more physically fit. And then as you get older, your priorities shift, and you realize, like, oh, okay, well, I don't really care as much about, physical aesthetics or anything to that degree, which we could get into the whole psychological aspect of a combatant perceiving you as a threat just based off physical appearance alone. But with that being stated, if your aesthetic drive diminishes over time, and when you lose that drive, to your point, then you end up losing the how. If you've lost your why, you lose the how. And so I actually see this a lot with guys. You brought up in your corner, like, hey, I've always been pretty confident in who I am, so I didn't really see that I needed it from an aesthetic perspective.
Yeah.
But a lot of guys on the other side of that fence that grew up that wanted to do it for aesthetic purposes, and then they got married and had kids, and then their priorities shifted and they realized, okay, looks aren't everything. Then they stop working out. And so they end up in the same boat. They're like, they started out this way, and then they lost that drive because your priorities do shift as an adult.
Yeah.
I had one of my wrestlers, actually, we had a freshman come up this year, and he's never wrestled before. So for those who don't know, I apologize. I also coach high school wrestling. I'm a high school wrestling coach here in the state of North Carolina. And so one of my wrestlers came up to me. He's a freshman. And I work out. I do strength and conditioning on top of grappling. So my schedule looks like this. I grapple 5 to 6 days a week, usually about 5 days a week, sometimes 6, depends on how I periodize my I create phases. But 5 days a week, generally, I'm grappling, whether it's judo, wrestling, or jiu-jitsu. And then 2 to 3 days out of the week, I also do strength and conditioning on top of that. One of those days just being strength and conditioning. And then, of course, Sunday being my rest day. Well, prior to this freshman coming in and wrestling for our team, he would lift at the local gym that I also lift at, so YMCA. And so I lift weights and he'd lift weights, and he'd come in and he'd see me. And, when you frequent a gym enough, you get to know the people that are in there. It becomes kind of a community of individuals that you just know. You see them all the time. You might not even know the guy's name, but you guys have just seen each other, anywhere from 3 to 5 days a week for the last 5 years. So you just you build an automatic sense of rapport and chemistry with that individual. And so this young man would come in and he'd see me lift all the time, and he'd ask me questions on how do I do this or how do I build that, or, and I get it a lot at the gym. And so I tell him, well, then fast forward to current times. He attends high school. He becomes he's a freshman wrestler. And he joins the team, and he didn't know I was a wrestling coach. So he sees me and he goes, oh, he didn't know my name. He's like, the strong guy at the gym, what's your name, blah, blah, blah. And I tell him, I'm Coach Sampson. And he goes, oh, okay. He goes, I had no idea. I thought you were just like a bodybuilder. And I told him, I said, I don't lift for aesthetics. I said, that's a byproduct, or it's a caveat.
Right.
It's the same thing that we relegate in the Second Amendment community. I own guns not to hunt or even to defend myself against the common robber. It is to have equal or greater power than a tyrannical government or an oppressing force.
Yep.
So that's what the Second Amendment grants me. The caveats and the byproducts is I can hunt with it. I can also thwart off a robber, and the list goes on.
Yep.
So it's the same perspective when it comes to physical fitness. Having abs or having the appearance of abs, because everybody technically has abs, but having the appearance of abs is just a byproduct or a caveat of being in good physical fit shape.
Right.
It's not the goal for somebody like me. So I told him, I said, I am no bodybuilder. I did a little bit of that when I was younger, and that was a driving force when I was a young guy. But my goal over the last decade has been to be the best athlete that I can be, not to be the best bodybuilder or the best power lifter or the best Olympic lifter. My goal is to be the best well-rounded athlete that I possibly can be. And that full encompassing of strength and conditioning and speed and mobility and coordination and all those things combined. So it's a combination of aspects of being the best prime athlete. I'm not a bodybuilder. I'm not a powerlifter. I'm an athlete. And it's not to degrade or denote those fields. More power to those guys. It takes a lot of discipline, a lot of work to do those things. And I have dabbled into, I would say, majority of all those fields. I have competed in pretty much all of them. I've competed in bodybuilding. I've competed in powerlifting. And I've done CrossFit, from all the modalities of different training styles or categories. I've definitely dabbled in all of them. And I think they were all valid in aiding my ability to kind of combine a lot of it together and understanding pure athleticism as a whole. But I had to kind of tell them, like, look, I'm not a bodybuilder, and I'm an athlete. My goal is to train as a good athlete, and how that can aid me in combat sports, which I would honestly put a lot of us in the 2A community as part of, I wouldn't say sports, but we're combatants by nature. This is part of what we do.
Right.
I had this conversation with my wife, and she's like, she listens to my podcast, and she goes, I'm not sure how to kind of take this as she's a 2A believer and a carrier and everything else. How do I apply this in the realm of what I'm doing? Because it almost sounds like I'm talking to fighters, right? Like wrestlers and mixed martial artists and jiu-jitsu practitioners and judokas. But I'm talking to all combatants when I say all of this, because we as the 2A community, and I don't want to say like gunfighters, but it is a martial art in itself. And so I think when we look at that, we must be also holding ourselves to that same standard as what I would hold a mixed martial artist or a grappler or a judoka or a wrestler or whatever. So the programming and the way that I view this as an athlete is to be the best combat athlete that I can possibly be. I think that's the best way to paraphrase that for all of us, even in the 2A community, that we're practitioners of this for the sake of the Second Amendment, is that we're combat athletes.
Yeah.
You, me, all of us, and we are all combat athletes. So the training regimen and the lifestyle that we live is not just relegated to the wrestler or the mixed martial artist. It's also relegated to all defense practitioners and all combat athletes.
Yeah.
So that's something that is a big part of the mindset, is that you're not a bodybuilder. And you'll find out that when we talk about a little bit of programming, you're going to be like, I'm used to doing 4 sets of 20, or maybe hypertrophy is your game. So you come from a bodybuilding background, or, low volume sets and high mass weight. So like a power lifter, maybe you're used to doing just a 3x3, and, I don't want to do, and it's like, well, if your goal is to be a good, full encompassing combat athlete, you're not going in there just for hypertrophy. You're not going in there just to move mass around. There's a reason for why we do and train the way we do, is to be the best combat athlete that we can be.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great spot to just segue into, kind of that operational fitness, or that practical fitness, that full encompassing fitness. So kind of getting started on that, what are steps that you think we need to take to get in that direction and to start improving our bodies to be able to do that more full encompassing fitness?
Yeah. So, strength and conditioning I never like to say you're weightlifting or your strength training. I think we need to get into the habit. We as combat athletes need to get into the habit of utilizing the terminology, because that's also going to help drive some of that mindset and motivation. As we say, what is my drive? What is my motivation? I don't care about being a mixed martial artist, or I don't care about being a wrestler or whatever. I care about, I like to go to the range. I like to shoot. I train so that I can fight a tyrannical government and protect my family. The list goes on. Okay, you're a combat athlete. So you also need to start speaking like one. So we don't just say weightlifting, or I'm just, we can say training, but strength and conditioning needs to be a nomenclature that we need to utilize the most when we're relegating to that. And I think that's an important, almost like a mental switch that you cut on, because when you think about strength and conditioning, you don't think about hypertrophy. For those that don't understand what hypertrophy is pretty much lifting until you have exhausted the muscle fascia and the fibers to just almost utter damage, right? And this is kind of where we see bodybuilders go into. The bodybuilders primarily lift in a level of hypertrophy. So they don't lift for strength. They don't lift for anything else, but for the sake of developing as much fascia and tissue as possible. So hypertrophy tends to yield the best results in those regards, and that's usually consistent of doing high repetitious sets. So hypertrophy might look like 4 sets of 10, 3 sets of 15, or 2 sets of 20, or something to that degree. So as combat athletes, we aren't looking to deteriorate as much tissue as possible, because generally for bodybuilders, they're breaking a lot of the muscle down in the gym, and then of course through sleep and through protein synthesis and exogenous ingestion of macronutrients, they're building it back up. But they're just trying to build tissue, right? Because bodybuilding is just sculpting the physical aesthetics of the body.
Right.
So blowing up the muscle belly head as big as possible is deteriorating the tissue, rebuilding the tissue, deteriorating. And in strength and conditioning, we are doing some of that, right? The way homeostasis works for human beings is it's a high level of adaptation. Humans, we're very adaptable. We have a very good ability to physically adapt to things that are pressed upon us, physical activity wise. So to kind of fight homeostasis, you're going to get some breakdown. I'm not saying you're not breaking down the muscle in a somewhat similar sense the way a bodybuilder will, but you're not doing it just for the sheer sake of that. Therefore, you're not exacerbating it to that degree. Okay. So again, looking at this from the perspective of this is strength and conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just lifting. This isn't just, bodybuilding or whatever. So again, going forward as combat athletes, we're here to do strength and conditioning. As far as strength is concerned, there's a little bit of physics in that. I'm a nerd. I like that kind of stuff. So if I lose you, I'm going to try and break this down as simple as I can for a lot of people. That was one thing you and I talked about just a minute ago was the one thing I didn't like about the military was it wasn't about the why or even the how. It was just do because this is what we've always done and just do it,
Yeah.
So my goal is to always know the why and the how. And if I don't, I'm going to always try and find out. A big part of this really just boils down to learning how to read literature. For a lot of guys, you can say you've read studies, and you and I could read the same study and extrapolate two separate things from it. But it's for a lot of doctors, I will say that a lot of guys that go for their doctorates, you and I know a guy who what I would call a career student. He has multiple degrees, very intelligent human being. He was the guy that was my best man at my wedding. And he basically just stated, this is what college taught me to do. Just learn how to read literature. Just learn how to read the material and how to interpret that material, along with a few other things. But that's the biggest thing that we see with people. It's just learning how to read the literature versus just reading literature and then extrapolating some random something to fit my bias. And
Yeah.
Unfortunately, people in the medical field, they do that a lot. Either they have a bias that already exists and they will warp the narrative of the literature to express their biases, or their biases will only allow them to see it in one way or another. But learning how to read literature is, I would tell people, that is a big thing. Learn how to read literature in regards to especially sports science, human physiology, even endocrine. Before I get into this, I tell everybody I see, everybody I meet, go get your blood work done at least once every 6 months and learn how to read your blood work. That is crucial. Part of strength and conditioning, part of your physical fitness. Take looks aside, take muscle aside. If your blood work is trash, you can look great on the outside, but the inside, you're dying. Your blood work you need to learn how to interpret your blood work. Go get your CBC, your blood panels done once every 6 months, and then learn how to read that and understand how can I up and lower whatever levels I need to do. So I'll say that. With that being stated, if I lose you guys, I apologize. I'll try and break some of this down as best as possible. So strength training, I think for me, looking at this from a physics-based perspective, is just force production. Okay. So when we look at a guy that just does a bench press or just does a deadlift or just does a squat, they're just producing force. Okay. And force is just mass times acceleration. I'm just taking mass and I'm just accelerating it. And it doesn't matter. It's not predicated upon the amount of time that I'm doing this. It doesn't matter how fast I do it. I'm just trying to move mass. So that's weightlifting in general, right? So to break that down as simplistic, as elementary as I possibly can, just basic force production is just moving weight around, right? And as combat athletes, force production is a big part of that, but it's also encompassing with speed and rate of time and my ability to do this over time. So we focus more from a strength-based perspective, and I'm using air quotes for those that can't see this. I don't want to just relegate this just to strength or just force production. In the sports science world, we call this power production. And to produce power, again, going back to physics, the physics equation is force times velocity. So we talked about this a minute ago, that force times acceleration mass times acceleration is just force production. I'm just picking the weight up.
Right.
Now power is now picking that weight up at a specific velocity. So now I'm adding speed, I'm adding a time-based movement into that. And why is that important? Well, because pretty much majority of studies have proven that while they're both extremely important, that power production and utilizing time produces so much better athletic performance markers than just force by itself. So literally, you just trying to achieve that PR deadlift that you wanted. Maybe it was 500, 600, 700 pounds. I just want to deadlift 700 pounds. That helps. But when we're talking about overall performance markers as an athlete, we have realized that power is more important than force production alone. So again, just kind of understanding force production is just 100% of that 1 rep max, just that I'm moving weight from point A to point B, okay, versus the power aspect is utilizing the force times the velocity to move it with the rate of speed. Now we use what's called a max rate of force development to create that power, okay? And basically what max rate of force development, which is max rate of force development, is basically how fast an athlete can develop that force in itself, the velocity in itself. There is for anyone that's listening, when you get a chance, Google what is called a force velocity curve. And it's basically a graph. You've got a y-axis and an x-axis. And on that graph, you have at the top what's called max force production, which is what we talked about. I'm just producing force. Underneath that, we have what's called strength, speed. Then you've got power. Then you've got speed strength. Then you've got reactive strength. And then you've got max speed. So without trying to burn everyone's brain out with this, power is pretty much in the middle, right? The top end of that graph is max force. That's how much I can just pick up one rep max, and that's it. I have nothing left in the gas tank. And on the bottom end of that graph is just max speed. No weight is attached to me, and I'm just moving at the highest level of velocity that I possibly can. So I have I'm not sustaining any load at all except just my body weight. What we're finding for strength training, and I use that term loosely, for combat athletes is that power is the best modality of training. So that's actually somewhere in the middle. So for power production, when we say, how much should I be lifting? The reason it's important to find out what your 1 rep max is so that we can base percentages off of how we lift on our daily training, modality of training, right? So still find out what your 1 rep max is, whether it be a snatch, a clean and jerk, a bench press, a squat, a deadlift. Still, you need to know what those 1 rep maxes are. Mm-hmm. But strictly, mostly for the sake that I can now know the percentage of that 1 rep max to begin my training cycle, okay? So for power production, we generally want to train somewhere between 30 and 80% of our 1 rep max, right? So let's say, for arbitrary numbers, you are super strong. You're a really strong guy, and you have a 1 rep max on a deadlift of, say, we'll just say arbitrarily for easy math, 1,000 pounds. You can deadlift 1,000 pounds. You're up there with top level guys like Hafthor Bjornsson and Eddie Hall and all these guys and Brian Shaw. You can deadlift 1,000 pounds. 50% of that obviously is going to be 500 pounds. That is going to be your power production load. Okay. So we're looking, I think for me, the happy medium is usually about 40%, but it's going to vary from person to person. I would say no less than 30%, no more than 80, 40% for velocity to really get as much out of velocity as it possibly can. 40% is probably the best max load. So if you're 1,000 pound deadlifter, 400 pounds is going to be your power production training phase. Okay. So what does that mean? It means that 400 pounds, now I'm going for speed. I'm going to try and utilize that with a sense of velocity. Okay. And the reason that is because you have to understand most athletic movements are too fast to express at maximal force. So me running, let's say I'm on the range and I've got my carbine and we've set up a course to where I've got a barrel here and a barrel here. Maybe I've got a pony wall or a fake wall set up here and whatever, and I need to run from one barrel to the other, but now I need to make a fast, hard cut to the left. Maximal force production isn't going to generally help me in making that quick turn. Okay, maybe I need to jump over something to get to the next wall. Maybe I've set up a smaller barrel that's 3 feet high, and I need to jump over that barrel to then go around this other wall to then start manipulating my carbine. My 1 rep max is not generally what's going to allow me, because to jump over that barrel, the amount of time is so short that I cannot express maximal force. So if your 1,000-pound deadlift takes you 2 seconds to fully stand up, I don't have 2 seconds to jump over this barrel.
Right.
So your 1,000-pound deadlift that took you 2 seconds doesn't matter to get you over this barrel. Okay, so that's why it's important to understand your 1 rep max of just pure max force is not going to always translate to your athletic movements, because athletic movements are just too fast to express pure maximal force. Power, however, gives me enough time. So just putting this into perspective, it takes between 0.7 and 1.0 seconds for a very good athlete to produce minimal maximal force. Sometimes it can take people up to 2 seconds to produce maximal force. A sprint averages between 0.12 and 0.21 seconds to express. Directional change. So we talked about going from one barrel and cutting to the left real fast. That's what we would consider directional change. Directional change takes 0.4 to 0.7 seconds. That's not enough time to express pure maximal force. So I need to drop my workload. Let's say that deadlift or that squat, that 1,000 pounds, 40% of that load or 50% of that load, that 400 or 500 pounds needs to be my workload. And I need now to express it at least, and my goal is to express it in that time that I need directional force change. So if I'm cutting the barrel and on average it takes 0.4 to 0.7 seconds, I need to be able to deadlift or squat or move at that rate of speed with load. So now when I do it without load, I'm going to be cutting that corner like that. I'm going to be moving it so much faster, because if I can achieve a 0.5 seconds with a 400-pound deadlift or a 400-pound squat or whatever that modality of movement is, which we'll get into modality of movements in here in a minute, but whatever that movement of expression is, if I can do that weighted, sustained load at 0.5 or 0.7, then when I do that without load, I'm going to be exponentially faster.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I remember when a while back, I actually reached out to you and I said, "Hey, man, I'm trying to consistently go to the gym. I don't know what I'm doing. You know, I kind of go in there and I kind of pick stuff up and put it down. Like, I want to have some intention behind what I'm doing." And I remember in the program you made, it was for me and then one of my really close buddies, and we both were like, we need to lose some weight, we need to build some strength. And I remember first couple days you were like, figure out your PRs, you know. And I remember you sent us a thing. You're like, I don't care how much it is, get your max and all of these things. And you sent like a full list of, you know, and this was spread out. I think it was like that first week was the priority, was like, get your absolute max and everything. And then, you came back to us with that data and you said, hey, you know, and I believe you went with it was basically 40% of, it was either 30 or 40. It might've been 30. Cause I remember you're like, you know, let's start small and kind of build our way up. But it was like right around that 40 or 30% of that PR and that max weight. And you were like, all right, now here's where you start implementing reps. And like something that always stuck with me that you were telling me was, don't just go through the motions. Like, don't just pick this up. You were like, try to freaking, like, if you're doing a snatch or something, like rip that thing up. Or like when you're going up or down on your bench press, like, do it explosively, you know, like really push into it. And that's something that makes so much sense now hearing you explain it that way. Cause before I was just kind of following instructions. I was like, sweet, he knows what he's talking about, you know, right. But hearing it broken down that way, it makes perfect sense. So, yeah.
I mean, it's creating a baseline, which anyone in our community, we have heard that term over and over and over again, right? We create a baseline of everything, create a baseline of your environment, and then look for the anomalies, and the list goes on, right? So like, we use that term so much. It's the same thing in physical fitness. You need to create a baseline to then know what needs to be expressed the most. If I'm a super strong guy, then Force production, maximal force production is probably not at the top of my list because I already have more maximal force production than the average person is going to. So now I need to be more expressive in speed or mobility or whatever it may be. Maybe I'm a really fast guy, but I can't move the weight around. You can be, let's say you're super fast. You can be the quickest dude in the world. But if I can't move your body weight, let's say I'm in a physical altercation with another human being, especially a heavyweight, which statistically speaking, in Western civilization, a lot of people out there are heavyweights, right? There's a lot of, I'm trying to put this in weight classes here and be as nice as I can, but a lot of Americans are heavyweights.
Yeah.
So I could be 150, 160, 170 pounds, lean and super fast. But if I can't move weight in itself, no matter how fast I am, then speed is probably not going to be the top of the list. It still needs to be trained. But now force production, I need to bring my force production up. So this isn't just work on speed, just on strength, just on cardio or energy systems or whatever. It's, all right, I know where my strength already is. This is why you create that baseline. Whenever you create all of your percentages and you get those percentages up, and this doesn't just on your lifts. Now with you, I was trying to create a baseline of athleticism to begin with, to then go from there. So those PRs, which is, you'll hear a lot of guys utilize that term, but that's pretty much what it is. It's just recreating a new high baseline. That's all a PR is. So a PR doesn't have to be relegated to just how much I lift. My broad jump, for example, has been my most recent goal. Right, I have a 9 foot, and for a heavyweight, this is actually pretty good. And I'm not a super tall guy. I'm about 5'11". For most guys that know, I'm 5'11". I'm 215 pounds, give or take. For me to have a 9 foot broad jump standing, that's not bad at all. I'm not a basketball player. I'm not a super tall guy. So my new goal for the PR is to have a 9.5 broad jump.
Yeah.
You know, and so that PR, it varies on whatever phase, and you'll go through phases of training. That's the way it should be. Any fighter that's out there, any combat athlete, we go through phases of training. You have mixed martial artists that train. You guys ever watch MMA or UFC or One Championship, any of these other big fighting organizations, Bellator, these guys that fight, they go through phases, right? You have an off season, you have a pre-camp, you have a camp, and then you have a taper that goes into fight day, and then you have an off season, a pre-camp, and the list goes on. So that physically changes, right? So you have to create a baseline of all your performance markers. Create that baseline, and then you go, well, geez, I've got, going back to that arbitrary 1,000 pound deadlift. I've got a 1,000 pound deadlift. That's more than 0.0001% of the population will ever pull. I probably don't need to worry about force production in a deadlift. Right? I need to worry about speed or mobility in that particular movement, that hip hinge based movement. But let's say you're really fast, but you can barely deadlift your own body weight itself, which if I'm fighting, I will say there is a baseline that you should begin to create in some of these lifts, that I should at least be able to move my body weight or someone equal to my body weight with that equal amount of speed. So the speed is what I'm really good at. Then force production, I need to bring that up to then match it with my speed, and then speed train with that force production. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So again, it's creating a baseline of where you need to be at to then say, okay, I need to physically start training myself in that direction. For a lot of people, majority of us, we're heavyweights. A lot of Western civilization, we're heavyweights. So moving mass around is probably not going to be the hardest thing for most of us. Even people that don't lift weights are generally going to, and they're a heavyweight. Let's say you take a 250, 275 pound or 300 pound guy. Even if he doesn't lift weights, he's still going to be generally stronger than the rest of the population.
Yeah.
And that's primarily due to neuromuscular adaptation. So for those that don't understand, hypertrophy or just muscle fascia alone is not what creates ultimate strength or just force production. It's also a neuromuscular construct, which has a lot to do with the mind in itself. But a person that moves 300 pounds around every day of the week, their bone density is going to be thicker.
Yeah.
Even their connective tissue is going to be a little bit more dense. Now, if I had a soft 300 pounds and a yoked 300 pounds that just constantly puts his body under pressure, while even the soft 300 pounder still is going to have better bone density than the average smaller guy, or a little bit more connective tissue and strength than the smaller guy, the guy that's yoked at the same weight, his potentiation is considerably higher than even the other 300-pound guys. So if you're going to be a heavyweight, you need to be a solid heavyweight if that's what's going to. And I'm not against heavyweights. Again, as long as your blood markers show up good, you get your blood panel done every 6 months, and your performance markers are great, I don't care what you weigh. And this is another mindset thing / training aspect that we need to get into, is our healthy relationship with viewing numbers and weight, as well as viewing our fuel sources, which we'll talk into food here in a little bit, but how we view food, my relationship with food. I can eat all the best things in the world, but if I don't have a great relationship with food and I just literally gorge even good stuff, it's still going to affect me, because I'm going to constantly be in a caloric surplus. It's the same thing in my relationship to the scale that I see. And it's not to say don't be, there have been a few studies that have associated with a higher mortality rate with just body weight in general, even if it is solid body weight. But that cap off is like mid 200s. So that's like 250 to 275 range and above. With that being stated, that mortality rate is based upon how much stress is being placed upon the endocrine system, how much stress is being placed upon the organs, and the list goes on. So there is a point to where too much weight, no matter the quality of weight, is still too much weight. It's still not good for you. But again, that's the studies have shown that it's been the mid 200 range. So I will say, if you're underneath that and your blood markers are good and your performance markers are good as far as an athlete's concerned, I don't really care if you're 150 pounds or 220. It's how's your body performing internally, and then how are you performing as an athlete? So having a good relationship with those numbers. So why am I saying that? Well, I'm saying that because I'm a heavyweight. I'm in the same category weight class as I would say majority of the people out there. Now, composition is a little bit different, and I think composition is an important thing to understand. But knowing that not the rest of the world, majority of Western civilization falls to the heavyweight category, I'd be a fool to not also work on force production. You need to still create force production, still work on strength training, especially if force production is a weak point for you. But I use those points because I think it's important for us to understand that just powerlifting, just picking up heavy weight is not the end all be all, nor is it the total equation that we should be looking at. It's just a variable, if you will. So I want to create that baseline.
Yeah.
Right. Now, understanding that my goal is to more or less about power production and not just absolute strength production, what are the best ways for me to move? So I have comprised a list based on anecdotal experiences and then also in observation of other performance athletes. And I would say a lot of combat athletes and coaches would agree with me that this comprised list is what I would say is the minimal. If you can obviously incorporate more, then great. But the list of movements, these are what I would say should be the minimal standard for pretty much anybody, but especially for the combat athlete. A push movement. So that could be comprised of a bench press, push-ups, a standing dumbbell press, dips, anything like that, right? A pull movement, which is an exercise that's comprised of things like a barbell row or a pull-up or a dumbbell row, face pulls. And these are all names. When you hear me name these things off, they're not names that Sam made up. You guys can go Google them. They're universal terms that anyone can look up. Okay. So a push movement, a pull movement, a hip hinge based movement, which is either a clean snatch and pull, a trap bar deadlift, a standard deadlift, hip bridges. I see a lot of guys make fun of, like, I see a lot of girls, they go to the gym and they put the bar on their waist and they've got like 315 and they're doing like glute bridges and hip bridges. And I get a lot of guys that are like, oh, that's how girls lift weights. Well, no, if you want to be a good combat athlete, you actually need to be doing those, believe it or not. And in wrestling, bridging is a huge part of how we get somebody off of us. Yeah. If I've got somebody mounted on top of me, or in jiu-jitsu, if I have someone mounted on top of me, bridging is a means to create space so that I can implement a technique to get someone off of me. So you have to have good bridging movements. So that's a big part of your hip hinge movements. Squatting, a squatting based movement. So that could look like a split squat. I'm a big fan of split squats. the front squat, a high bar squat, a low bar squat. So for those who don't understand, the differences is a high bar squat and a low bar squat are almost the same. The difference is where the bar sits. So the bar for a high bar squat is going to generally sit on the upper end of my traps. A low bar squat means the bar is going to sit lower. It's going to sit somewhere close to my scapula and subscapula to the lower end of my traps. Powerlifters, you see them squat, they usually do low bar squats. Olympic lifters usually do high bar squats. So I like high bar squats more because to me it's more relatable to everyday usage and what we use as athletes, because our weight is forward of us. If someone's fighting or pulling on me, or I need to even drive something in front of me, my weight is being thrown forward of me. And so a high bar squat keeps the weight centered over my not just my posterior chain, but my anterior chain, the front end of me and forward of me. So I have a lot of knee drive and a lot of quad drive. So I'm a big fan of high bar squats. Front squats is another one. If I hadn't mentioned those, I like those a lot. Zercher squats, some people call them Zercher squats. I actually have a post on my Instagram about those. Those are really great. That's a carrying based squat. You're just taking the bar, you're putting it in the crease of where your elbows, where your bicep and your forearm meets, and you're squatting. The weight is in front of you, but not only is your anterior and posterior chain loaded, but so are your arms. Like you're feeling it in your arms. And I mean, if you got to pick someone up, if you have to pick up a giant item, or maybe I got to move a human being across, Zercher squats are going to be great for learning how to cradle a person and then moving them. If you were in a combatant situation, maybe you did a double leg or you shot in on somebody and then they sprawled really good and all your weight is forward of you. You've got to learn to get up from that. And so having all that weight forward of you, training in that style of lifting from a squat based perspective, to me, it's better than like a powerlifting style of squat, which is like a low bar squat. Okay. A twisting based movement. So anything that's core based and twisting rotational, right? When guys get a chance to go Google the planes, you have what's called a sagittal plane. That's how most lifters do things in a 2-dimensional format. That's not how life hits us. Life is going to hit us at angles. They're going to hit us at turns. So we're going to be twisting. For a lot of my wrestlers and judokas, I tell these guys this all the time. When you're throwing somebody or you're grabbing something and you're moving, you're twisting your core when you do it. You're rotating your core a lot. And it's funny because I know you guys both have worked arduous blue collar jobs. And you know, going into those jobs, how many times have you had to watch the safety video before you go in? You got to watch all these dumb safety videos and you got to make sure you're OSHA compliant and all this other stuff, right?
Yeah.
And in the video, they show this guy, he's got like the core stabilizing band on and he's holding a box and they're like, never lift more than 50 pounds above your waist. And if you do, don't rotate. Make sure you lift with your knees and make sure you don't rotate your core.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not life, buddy.
Yep.
So, and this is something huge. I just made a post about it. That has a lot to do with mobility training versus flexibility. Flexibility and mobility are not the same thing. Although they go hand in hand, they're not the same. Mobility means that I can move in this direction under a sustained load. So you train that way, just like you start at the bottom. Maybe it's only 10 pounds and you work your way up to 100 or however much it is. Grabbing a 10-pound medicine ball or a 10-pound weight and just rotating might be your baseline of where you need to start. And then the next week or the next month, you're moving up and before long, you've got 100-pound plates and you're slinging them back and forth without damaging your posterior chain. And that's because you progressively loaded your body to be able to be mobile in that direction. And that's huge. Like the body adapts. I brought up homeostasis earlier. The body can adapt to any movement you put it under. And we used to, this like really old, outdated bro science, sports science is we would say, well, when you squat, don't let your knees go past your toes. And we've learned that's bull crap. Well, when you deadlift, don't round your back out. Actually, you can round your back out if you've done that in a progressive way. So if you've trained with a straight back and then all of a sudden you round your back out and decide to deadlift 1,000 pounds, yeah, you're gonna pull something. But if you've progressively loaded to be in that modality of movement over a course of time, your body adapts and you can actually move heavy weight in that weird direction. we see this with strongman competitions all the time.
Mm-hmm.
These guys aren't lifting conventional bars. They lean over and pick up an Atlas stone. You'll see a guy that picks up an Atlas stone. He's rounding out his back and he's grabbing his hands around it, and then he sits it over his knees and his quads, and he's halfway squatted, and then he puts his hands underneath it and he lifts it up. Why is he able to do that? Is because he's progressively loaded that specific movement over time. So you progress. He started out at 10 pounds, 20 pounds, 100 pounds, whatever it may be, and has worked his way up to that weight so he can safely move in that direction. Combat's the same way. If I've got somebody fighting against me, I can't say, like the old school OSHA video says, grab the box and you cannot rotate your waist. It's like, sorry, dude, you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
So what you do is you train in a rotational movement. You know, you can grab a medicine ball and you can do like medicine ball rebounds and twists. So I'm grabbing the ball and I've rotated and I've thrown it up against the wall, and then I catch it and I rotate and I throw it up against the wall. That's one way of twisting your core. You can do Mason twists. So you're just grabbing some plates, you're sitting on your butt, and you're just going back and forth and you're twisting, right? You can make it a little bit harder by pulling your feet up off the ground. Russian barbell twists. I'm a big fan of those. It's where you put the barbell into a landmine and you're holding it to your core and you're rotating it to the other side, and you're rotating it to the other side. And that's another core-based movement that causes rotation. Rotation is a big part of what we do, not only as combat athletes, but just primates in general, man. We move like that. So you have to train to learn that, be able to have that sustained load in that direction. So the next movement I would say is a carrying-based movement. So farmers carries, suitcase carries, front bag carries, dumbbell carries, those are all great. And we know this more than anybody, I would say. I mean, how many times have you had to pick up like a Skedco or, you know, anything like that, and like trying to pick someone up and have them on a stretcher of some sort, and you're just like walking with them. And we would do literal runs like that. We would put on our boots and have people like laid out full weight, and you know, leadership's like, let's make this as heavy as possible. So they're putting their kit on, they're everything they possibly can. And now you've got to run multiple miles in a carrying facet. And of course, your aerobic capacity is being tasked. I'm breathing heavy. But then afterwards, my traps, I'm going, holy cow, dude. My traps are just smoked. My forearms are smoked because all that grip strength and that isometric tension that I've been holding over a course of time, like you're just smoked in those directions. So carrying-based movements are going to translate well. You know, it's like there's an old saying guys used to say in bodybuilding. It kind of applies to this. It's like abs on a skinny guy don't count. It's like, you know, people would always say that back in the day. And then I think who was it? Dorian Yates, he was asked, this is a very prominent bodybuilder. He would say, you know, I've heard the saying that abs on a skinny guy don't count. And then he goes, well, what do you think the true testament of strength is? And Dorian leans into the mic and he goes, if you see a man's traps, you know that guy works. And it's like, if anyone that's carried a Skedco, anyone that's carried a gurney or a stretcher of some sort, your traps are smoked, dude. Like it pulls on those neck muscles, and then you feel that contraction. The other thing to carrying muscles is it really helps build those traps up, in my opinion. And the aspect of trap building and neck building is huge, which that will carry into my next movement, is you need to do some kind of neck building exercise. Mike Tyson would do a lot of neck building exercises because when he'd get punched in the face by heavyweights, the amount of force and whiplash that his head would take, what is keeping the entire cranial system connected to your shoulders is your neck. And it's what helps protect a lot of the upper end of your spine. It allows you to absorb more force to the face. And same thing for grapplers. If my neck is being pushed in one way or the other, I need a strong neck. So traps and neck, doing some type of neck bridging exercise or neck rotational based exercise. I know you don't want to be that guy that's in the gym and it looks kind of weird, but you know, it's like, that's an exercise that needs to be annotated. So kind of that list again is a push based, a pull based, a hip hinge, a squatting, a rotational based exercise, a carrying based exercise, and or as well as a neck strengthening exercise. Now, it doesn't all have to be done in one sequence. You can do a little bit here, a little bit there. Maybe you wake up in the morning and you knock your push-ups out, Or you wake up in the morning and you hang your head over the edge of the bed and you go ahead and crank out some people call them neck ups, but you can work on your neck strength and mobility and dexterity there. So it doesn't all have to be in one training session, or, oh my God, I got to spend 3 hours at the gym 6 days a week to knock all this out. It doesn't have to be in one training session. So when you physically periodize this, don't think that you got to knock out all this in one day. Okay. So that's movement wise. That's what I would say should be a baseline, especially for combat athletes, for all of us. And it doesn't have to be crazy sets. You don't have to do, again, 4 sets of 20. And guys are so worried about, like, look, man, like you were saying, I have a job. I work 10, 12-hour days, sometimes longer. And now I've got to go to the gym. Where does that leave my time with my family, my wife, or my kids? Or what if I've got projects I want to do at home or whatever?
Yeah.
It's like, you don't have to spend hours at the gym. Studies have pretty much shown at this point that if you can dedicate, and it doesn't have to be sequentially in direct order, so it doesn't have to be in one day or even in the same amount of days. But studies have pretty much proven if you can dedicate 5 hours a week, there's 168 hours in that week. If you can dedicate just 5 of those to physical fitness, you're going to be leagues above the rest of the average human being. So that could look like 45 minutes, 6 days a week, or you could do an hour a day, 5 days a week. You could do, 2 30-minute sessions. You get up in the morning, you do 30 minutes before you go off to work, and then you get off and you do 30 minutes when you get off work. That's a great way to physically train it. And you could physically train 7 days a week if you wanted to. The downside, what I would say is you need to use an RPE scale if you're going to do that. So I would never have like a really hard day backed up against a really hard day.
Okay.
So if I wanted to train 7 days a week, let's say Sunday for me is a pure rest day because I train pretty hard throughout the week as is. But you could train 7 days a week. So if you're like, I can only do 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes at night, you can still train that 7 days a week. You would use what's called an RPE scale. 10 being, I got nothing left in the gas tank. 1 being, it's barely more than walking, barely more than getting up off the couch. If I have a day to where I've trained a 7 or an 8, then the next day just train to a 3 or a 4. If that makes sense. So you don't have to go like all out every training session. If Saturday I trained a 7 or an 8, then maybe I want to work on, some neck-based exercises and maybe a little bit of aerobic capacity. I'll keep it to a level 3 or 4. I do 2 sets of 10 or 3 sets of 15 on my neck just to strengthen the neck muscles. 3 sets of 10 with 60 seconds in between each. I mean, that's not even a few minutes.
Yeah.
You spend a few minutes doing that. It's not too arduous. And then a little bit of aerobic capacity. Maybe you've got an elliptical in your house. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be high impact cardio. We always think about running like, oh my God, my feet hitting the ground and my knees are just shuddering just thinking about it. It's like you can get on an elliptical and do aerobic capacity for 15 minutes. You know what? It's nothing, 15, 20 minutes. Or turn it into an alactic capacity, which is I do 15 seconds on at full speed, 15 seconds off, just jogging, chill speed. And you do that for 5-10 minutes. And you've literally spent 15 minutes strengthening your neck, and you've built your alactic capacity as well as some of your aerobic capacity. So for a lot of guys out there, it's like, hey, we're on a time crunch. I get it, man. I work those 10, 12-hour days. So I had to learn how to physically do 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes when I got off, or whatever it may be. And before I became a father, it was a little bit easier. I could do even more. I did a lot. Back in the day, I was crushing my body 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night. But
dang,
with now being a father and everything else, you got to be smart about it. You could do 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes at night, an hour in the morning, hour at night, however you want to break that up, but just use that RPE scale. Okay. So 10 being the hardest, 1 being I'm barely getting up off the couch. So again, for you guys, it's like, hey, I've got to do this 7 days a week. How can I fit all this physical fitness in? Well, on day 7 or day 6 or whatever it is, just do a level 3 or 4 base style of training. Don't do a 10, don't do a 9 or an 8. So it's just being intelligent. You can train 7 days a week if you want to. We're physically designed to do so. You just have to be smart about the intensity that you put out on those days.
Yeah. No, that's really awesomely broke down. And it makes it seem very attainable, even with like a busy schedule. And like between Steven and I and you, and you know, there's a lot of people I'm sure that listen that are like, dude, my schedule's crazy busy. And yeah, I mean, but when you break it down like 5 hours a week, it's like, man, that's so doable, you know. It's absolutely doable. So,
and that's the biggest thing is, again, we're not bodybuilders, we're not powerlifters. I don't need to dedicate 2 hours 5-6 days a week. And you also have to understand, a lot of these guys, let's be real here, this is also something I think is important for us to note. You know, guys like me, when I was young, I grew up and I would read the muscle and fitness magazines and the Mr. Olympia stuff, and I was like, man, that's so cool. And when I was a kid, outside of wrestling, a driving force was aesthetics. I wanted to look good. I wanted to, it built a sense of mental confidence that allowed me to also progress in other things. And there is a mental state that I will say confidence goes a long ways when we're talking about fighting. So it is a big thing that does help in those regards. But let me tell all the young guys, especially that may not know this, but just everybody in general, a lot of your superheroes that you see on these magazines and stuff, and they're training, you know, their RPE scale is a level 9, and they're doing that level 9 6-7 days a week. Those guys are on all kinds of stuff that allows them to be able to do that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and preface right now and say those guys are exogenously taking stuff in, whether it be via a needle or oral format, that allows them to be at a level 9 RPE scale 6-7 days a week. So set your expectations to a realistic sense, right? You're not going to train like Ronnie Coleman or like, and even the pro CrossFit guys. A lot of these pro CrossFit guys, they're yoked out the gills. They can run 5 miles and then turn around and do, you know, they'll climb a rope that's 90 feet tall and then come back down and then do snatches. And it's like, you watch CrossFit games, all those like pros that you see on that level. And I'm not knocking anybody that this isn't like a conviction, you shouldn't use this or you shouldn't use that. If that's what you do, hey, if your blood markers are good, your performance markers are good, and your creator's okay with that, then more power to you. But from my perspective, for guys that understand this, that need to understand this, all these professionals that you see that they're training at a high level and they're going at it 3 and 4 hours every day, 7 days a week, those guys are on some stuff. So set your expectations to a real expectation. Now, I have paid the physical cost of really trying to grind out like that and realizing that even if you have great genetics, like the body's just not meant to sustain that level of output. So I had to dial it back. I had to be smart about it. I'm also, like you stated, we're getting a little bit older. I have to be smart about these things. So I had to adjust the training schedule for that as well. But this is 100% doable by anybody that, you know, from the average guy that only works 40 hours a week to the, you know, hyper worker of the blue collar field that might work 70 hours, 60, 70 hours a week. It's definitely attainable. And I say this from experience because, you know, I've done everything from, you know, part-time offsite jobs of sales to concrete work to roofing. I mean, if anybody's ever hauled shingles up ladders, it sucks. Like it's like old school in the South, especially that you're talking 95-degree weather at like 100% humidity. And I got to spend 10 hours hauling shingles up ladders and, you know, like roofing is no joke, man. So, I mean, I get it. I understand. And you're exhausted at the end of the day. And that's, of course, where we can segue into fuel sources. Your fuel source is going to be a big part of that. Like, how are you fueling your body that you can then go do something arduous throughout the day and also go train afterwards or before you go do that job?
Yeah. If you want to start getting into nutrition, I think this would be, like you said, a great place to segue into that. Before we do that, I was curious, because I really like that you brought up having realistic expectations, and I really like that this whole direction you have is very based on like what's practical, what are things you may need as a combatant athlete. And by the way, I like that term, combatant athlete. It's like exactly kind of what we're all talking about. That practical or operational fitness, you know, it's from what you're saying, it's like you don't need to be on all this gear, all these
Right.
just super intense supplements to maintain a level of that operational performance. You
Right.
stick to these things you're talking about and are regimented about it and dedicate the time and put in the effort, and you're going to start to build it, from what it sounds like to me. So,
and I would encourage guys, everyone, go Google what an RPE scale is. This is going to help kind of put visual context into it for you. And look up, actually, I want you to look up this. RPE and RIR. And RPE stands for rate of perceived exertion. And then an RIR scale is the reps in reserve. Okay. If you can grasp a good understanding of RPE and RIR, brother, I don't care how hard your day is at work, how blue collar you are, because I would say most of us have been blue collar workers for years.
oh yeah.
If you follow RPE and RIR, you can 100% train almost every day of the week if you wanted to.
I'll make
as long
it
as
easy.
you're following that scale.
I'll stick this in the description. So I'll find after
Okay.
we get done recording, we'll find a good graph that you think explains it well, and I'll link it in the description. So that way you can go
Sweet.
down and check out exactly what Sam's talking about.
Awesome. Yeah. So for the average person, again, this is 100% obtainable. You don't have to be on all this other gear and stuff. Now, I'm sure there are guys, I've seen a lot of guys, and I won't name any famous dudes that we probably follow and or have seen in the community, especially when they're older. Now, there is something to be said if you decide to go to your doctor, get your blood work done, and they tell you, hey, man, you need to be put on testosterone replacement therapy. Cool. If your doctor is cool with that, your family's cool with that, and your blood markers come out great whenever you're on it, by all means, do it. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to sit here and discourage guys and say, hey man, you shouldn't be taking exogenous hormones, or hey man, you shouldn't be taking anything that can influence your endocrine system. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is, for those that choose not to go that direction, it is still obtainable for you to 100% have good athletic output and train and be a good combat athlete. Now, I will say for a lot of the older guys, and as you get older, to your point that you brought up, Jacob, is that as we get older, our endocrine system does change. After we turn 30, I believe testosterone percentages changes for males anywhere between 1% and 5% every year. And then after we turn 41, that drastically increases anywhere between 5 and 15% every year. So, and testosterone plays a big factor into it. Same thing with growth hormone, your natural growth hormone, your pituitary glands that put out growth hormone. These things diminish with time and age. So that is 100% a real thing. I'm sure most of our listeners are young guys, but we may have some of those guys in the field. I've talked to several friends of mine, 50, 60 years old, and they're like, hey man, look, I wasn't an athlete when I was younger, and I don't have anything to build on top of what I'm starting from scratch. And if you go get your blood work done and you're within the range that you need it, go jump on testosterone replacement therapy. I'm not saying don't do those things. Okay. That's between you and your doctor. I will say that I personally have a problem with the way the general system, the healthcare system kind of sees things, right? And this goes back to like the health pyramid, right? And, the health pyramid we've kind of learned is bull crap. And it's kind of outdated, right? It's the same thing with a lot of blood markers, believe it or not. The blood markers for a lot of people, for when you go get your blood panels done, it has set the bar set really low. I'll say that. I have seen people go get their blood panel done, and the general census is anywhere between 76 nanograms per deciliter up to 900 nanograms per deciliter for the average male's testosterone. 76 nanograms per deciliter is stupid low. But if you are at 78 or at 80 nanograms per deciliter, the healthcare system will say, oh, you don't need to be on testosterone. You don't need to be on anything. You're good to go. And it's like, bro, you've got the endocrine system. I've seen 35-year-old guys have the endocrine system of a 91-year-old man. And
Yeah.
because they fall in that really wide general range and the bar has been set so low, you got 35-year-old guys that are like, why am I crashing? Why do I not have energy? Why can I not recover properly? And the list goes on. And it's like, well, you're within this low bar set standard, but dude, your testosterone is way too low. Like, in order for you to realistically think that you're going to recover well, and, you know, could be, I will say, like, if you're doing roofing, and then even just like a basic construction worker, for example, if you're not able to recover after 2 or 3 days, man, there's something going on with your system, even from a basic blue collar perspective. And studies have proven over the last 15, 60 years that the average testosterone of males has actually declined drastically. So, you know, and we can always debate correlation or causation. Some people say it's environmental factors. Some people say it's sedentary living or lifestyle living as to why our ancestors had higher testosterone levels than we do currently. But nonetheless, testosterone has plummeted in males within Western civilization drastically over the last 50 to 60 years. What reason that is, we don't necessarily know. We can speculate and create conjecture, but nonetheless, if I've got a 35-year-old male that has 80 nanograms per deciliter of testosterone, go talk to your doctor and go get some type of hormone replacement therapy and get yourself set up right, because we've kind of created taboo around exogenous hormones, and that is primarily because of what the 90s did to sports. We understand what happened with Barry Bonds and, you know, and Sosa and a lot of these guys. And I understand that, right? Abusing anything is a bad thing. Even too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. If I chug 3 gallons of water in a matter of 5 minutes, I am going to poison myself. Okay. I'm going to literally destroy my system, and I could possibly die, even though water is good for me. So too much of a good thing is a bad thing. But that's why I tell people, go get your blood work done. Go get your system checked. Go get your endocrine checked. Don't set the bar too low for yourself. If you are 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years old, a lot of guys that worked in our career field, for example, it's a high stress career field. And we have learned that over time that keeping your adrenal glands at a high rate, constantly firing up over and over, destroys our endocrine system. So for those who don't understand, your endocrine system is primarily what controls a lot of your hormonal output and input. Okay, so your receptors, your modulators, what they're putting out, and the list goes on. So for your endocrine system, if your testosterone is low, but you're only like 35 years old, you're going, well, part of that is time. Okay, some of that comes with time. But the other part of it is you've lived a very stressful and arduous life over a course of decades. And this is why we actually see this a lot within guys that get out from the infantry or the soft community, guys that have lived very stressful lives. I see this a lot in construction workers as well. You live an arduous life over and over and over, and you do this for years on end. It will destroy your endocrine system. Okay. Now, we can also relegate that to saying, hey, we don't have enough time off or things, you know, because our ancestors worked pretty hard too.
Yeah.
But the state of the economy in itself didn't require everyone in the household to work at high level rates like that. You still had family time. Before lights were invented, most people were done working when the sun went down.
Yeah.
Right. Majority of individuals. So there was a cutoff period versus nowadays it's like, hey man, we got production of light. We got daylight saving. We got all these things that I can work a little bit later if I really want to, you know? So, you know, you can always try and look at this from an ancestral perspective. And I hate when people use that argument. It's like, well, our ancestors, you know, for you Liver King guys out there, it's like my ancestors did this or whatever. It's like, well, your ancestors also died at the ripe old age of 40. Yeah, I know, right? But that's the thing is like your ancestors also died at the age of 40 years old.
Yeah.
You know, the lifespan that we can live now is drastically increased. It's not the same that you. So I don't like using the whole, you know, well, primal state of being. It's like, I get it, but primal state of being also meant you die from the common cold. So it's you know, I don't want to use that argument. But putting yourself underneath that level of stress for years on end, putting yourself in stress that years on it will 100% task your endocrine system. So I don't want anyone to feel convicted on what I'm saying. Yeah. Go get your hormones checked. If you need testosterone replacement therapy, brother, go do it. Please go do it. Okay. But I digress.
Yeah.
So fuel sources, without like, I don't want to miss the forest for the trees, because there's 1,000 different diet plans out there, right? There's ketogenic diets, there is heavy carb based diets, heavy protein based diets, paleo, the list goes on. Let's just base this again, we're kind of going back into our realm of physics, and I think I enjoy learning physics. I think it goes great into a lot of what we do as combat athletes. So we need to understand the law of thermodynamics. And the law of thermodynamics in regards to fuel intake, at least from a caloric or a macro-based perspective, is it's calories in, calories out. Right? You're going to burn, if you can burn what you put in, regardless of the macronutrients, I can at least sustain the weight and or lose the weight. So we use terms that's called a caloric surplus or a caloric deficit. Okay. If I'm in a constant caloric surplus, I'm going to generally gain weight. It might come on slow, it might come on fast. That's individual dependent. But if you're in a caloric surplus, you're going to gain weight. I don't care if all those calories are nothing but protein. You could literally eat nothing but protein, which is, I think, would be almost not impossible, but it'd be really difficult and disgusting. But if you ate nothing but protein, but I ate 5,000 calories of protein and I just sat on the couch, I will be a blob. I will 100% be like, I will definitely be the nutty professor. And I don't care the quality of the macronutrients that you take in. If it's too much caloric intake overall, you are going to gain soft weight. Okay. Now, by saying that, it's going to piss off, like, just the keto guys and just the protein guys and just the carbohydrate guys. So for those who don't understand, calories are comprised of 3 main macros, although technically there's a 4th one. I don't subscribe to it just based on my lifestyle living, but for a lot of people that do, there is a 4th macro. So you have protein, fat, carbohydrates, and the 4th one is alcohol. Alcohol has its own macronutrient. Okay. So protein is 4 calories for every 1 gram. Carbohydrates is 4 calories for every 1 gram of carbohydrates. Fat is 9 calories for every 1 gram of fat. And alcohol, I believe, is 7 calories for every 1 gram of alcohol. Excuse me. So it's based on the percentage, the grams within a percentage of alcohol. So I know most people in America, we usually say a percentage by volume, but it's grams per percentage. So let me preface with that. So when you ingest these specific macros, they compound over time. Fat being obviously the highest, right? If it's 9 calories per 1 gram of fat, if I eat 10 grams of fat, that's 90 calories. If it's same thing with carbohydrates and protein, but in the realm of 4. So 4 calories for 1. If I eat 10 carbohydrates, that's 40 calories. So I can get away with eating 10 grams of carbs or 10 grams of protein, have less calories than if I ate 10 grams of fat. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So I can tailor that to how I want to. So this is always the number one question I get from combat athletes that are trying to lose weight. This is huge. It sounds like huge. I felt like the Don when I said that.
This is huge.
Huge, yeah. So how can I maintain high energy levels, but also in a caloric deficit and lose weight? This is the biggest. I don't usually see this from like the average person. The average person that doesn't give a crap about their performance markers, that just wants to lose weight. They don't even care about the quality of weight. They just want to lose weight. They don't care about performance markers. They don't care about quality of weight. They're like, how do I keep my energy high? Or they don't care about how keeping their energy high or performance markers high. They just want to lose weight.
Yeah.
But for us, I still want to be able to go out and lift weights. I still want to be able to go out and do my aerobic or anaerobic capacity based exercises. I need to go to the range. I got to go to the range this evening. We go every Tuesday. So I got to go to the range on Tuesday. Plus I got to lift today as well. So I got to go to the range, or I got to have enough energy to just work. I got to be able to do my blue collar job as well as have the energy to do this exercise. But I also need to lose weight. And that comes into the quality of the macronutrients, or not just quality, but the macronutrients in itself. Quality does matter, but it's primarily going to be based upon the macronutrients itself. So again, we talked about protein, carbohydrates, fat, and then alcohol. Alcohol generally is usually going to go through a glycolytic process. It will be converted into sugar. But outside of that, it really has no benefit from a macronutrients perspective, while the other three do have general health marker benefits. Alcohol doesn't. And that there's multiple reasons why I don't generally subscribe to that lifestyle, that being one of them. It also deprives my brain of oxygen, and the list goes on. But I'm just not a big alcohol guy. But for those that do, just understand it's a big part of your caloric intake, but it doesn't really drive anything in the realm of energy, although it can become glycolytic. You can use it for a carb source, but your body has to go through a process of what that's called. But I'll kind of I'll explain that here in just a second. So to me, for us, how can I keep my energy high, especially aerobic based capacity? Carbohydrates are going to be huge, and this is going to make a lot of guys that are anti-carb just kind of like really cringe. And this is huge. Like, studies have really proven this over time, that it is extremely difficult to have enough power through any anaerobic based performance exercise, whether it's your blue collar job. Again, we go back to slinging shingles up a ladder, or it is training in the gym. Those are all anaerobic. And the difference between aerobic and anaerobic, for those that don't understand, aerobic capacity is your ability to utilize oxygen as a primary energy source. So it's your capability to use your VO2 max is what we utilize that for. Versus anaerobic is my ability to be able to move weight around over a course of time. And that's primarily, we as Western civilization, we move in an anaerobic format. We don't generally move in aerobic format. So to power my anaerobic activities, such as my blue collar job, my exercises, and list goes on dietary fats alone, it's just not obtainable. I can't power through anaerobic activity at the most efficient rate through dietary fats alone. And I think it's important to note, because anaerobic exercise, it has to run off of what's called glycolysis. That's the word I was looking for. I apologize. I meant to use it earlier, but I couldn't find it, so I didn't use it. So it uses a system of what's called glycolysis. And so because you can't get enough oxygen from the mitochondria to run what's called a Krebs cycle. So a Krebs cycle, in short, is basically another energy system that is utilized for ATP, which is ATP stands for, let's see if I can remember this properly, adenosine triphosphate, I believe is the correct term, but most of it's just say ATP. You guys Google that just to make sure I'm on point. I don't want to misquote anything, but ATP in itself is something that it helps with cell proliferation, and it helps with it's basically an organic compound that helps provide energy from pretty much most all of your living cells. Okay, so yeah, ATP, I believe that's,
you nailed it.
Adenosine, okay,
Yeah.
triphosphate, okay, just want to make sure I said that right. I was trying to remember. So anyways, glycolysis has to occur when we're doing anaerobic activity, and fat primarily goes through what's called a Krebs cycle to create energy. Aerobic energy, to do anything, anaerobic, to do anything anaerobic, it requires glycolysis, not the Krebs cycle. Okay, so carbohydrates is going to primarily be the best energy source for anaerobic capacity. That's picking stuff up and putting it down. That's what your anaerobic capacity is going to be primarily made up of. Okay?
So is that why marathon runners and stuff will carb load?
Yes. So you go through carb loading phases, the night before. Now, the quality of carbs does play a factor.
Right.
If I have a high glycemic based carbohydrate, meaning a faster source, that would be a better source right before I go work out or soon within my workout phasing, versus high glycemic carbohydrates are not going to benefit me as much if they're done, at some other point in time. It's going to be most beneficial before or right after my workout. I need to refuel my system, right? Now, with that being said, as we talked about earlier, calories in, calories out.
Yeah.
So even if it's a high glycemic carb, or a complex carb. Now, high glycemic carbs are definitely more beneficial prior to working out. But if calories in, calories out, and all calories being created equal, then high glycemic carbs and low glycemic carbs also fall in that realm of understanding. So when I get people that are like, oh my gosh, I ate my high glycemic carb earlier in the day, is that going to cause me to get fat? If it's the same amount of carbs that you can stay in a calorie deficit, no, you're not going to get fat. Okay. If your carbohydrates, there was a professor, I believe it was out of Harvard. Don't quote me on this. I believe it's out of Harvard. There was a professor who went on what's called the Twinkie diet. You listeners, everybody Google the Twinkie diet. It's pretty hilarious. A lot of his students were, they were like holistic and whole foods kind of mentality of community. And these guys basically all told their professor, you have to eat whole foods. That's the only way that you'll ever lose weight. And he wanted to prove them wrong. And so he went on what's called the Twinkie diet. His normal daily intake of calories was 3,000 calories a day. He put himself in a caloric deficit of 1,850 calories a day, but he only ate Twinkies. That's it. Now that sounds like a disgusting diet to me, but if you like Twinkies, it sounds like a paradise, right? So all he did was he ate Twinkies. All he did was eat Twinkies, but he stayed at 1,850 calories. That's it, in Twinkies. He lost 38 pounds. All of his blood markers, so his triglycerides, his HDL, his LDL cholesterol, all those levels were all even better than they were beforehand when he was eating nothing but vegetables and steak and those types of things. Like he was eating from a quality source-based perspective, he was eating better foods before, but he was in a caloric surplus, meaning he was overweight and he was putting on continual soft weight. And then when he went to a caloric deficit and only ate Twinkies, his blood markers actually improved simply because he lost weight.
Dang.
Now, I'm not saying crap the bed on your micronutrients. So for those that don't understand, vitamins and things like that, those are your micronutrients. And now we're talking about macronutrients. There's two different things. Still get your vitamins in. They're still helpful. When we're talking about cognitive function, right? We're talking about cell proliferation, having good quality, healthy eyes, and your endocrine system. Yes, still take in good quality micronutrients. Still eat your vegetables. Still, take your multivitamins. Still eat good, healthy foods. I'm not saying don't do that, but that's primarily micronutrients. A lot of the factors that we find in studies right now are primarily based upon caloric surplus and caloric deficit and how much body fat you're actually obtaining. So that's why I say weight doesn't matter. It does, but under a certain amount. It's the quality of weight. Fat reduction versus fat production. And this guy was able to lose weight and his blood markers improved, primarily because he had lost fat. So that just kind of goes into understanding. It's like, don't miss the forest for the trees. A lot of guys that get so caught up in, I have to only eat whole foods, but then they don't actually manage how much of it they eat. They're like, well, all I need to eat is, carrots and tomatoes and cucumbers and kale or whatever. And it's like, if you're eating 5,000 calories, I don't care what it is. If you're not able to burn that off according to the law of thermodynamics, you're gonna put on fat. It's just you can't stop that regardless. So I don't want guys to get heavily caught up on that, but it does help. I'm not saying micronutrients it should be neglected. Why am I telling you that? Because it feeds into the understanding that anti-carb and anti-fat and anti-protein culture is a horrible mindset to have. And this again ties back into mindset. All this ties into mindset. But it is a horrible relationship that you will have with food if you maintain the mindset that carbohydrates are horrible, fat is horrible, protein's horrible, or even alcohol. Although alcohol has less benefit than I would say the other three, it's not the worst thing in the world as long as you can do things in moderation. From a theological perspective, we've been saying this for 2,000 plus years, right? So I mean, like in moderation it's a huge part of this, and that basically is maintaining a caloric deficit or a maintenance level of caloric intake. So again, I think it's important to understand the differences between the macro and the micronutrients, because the overall caloric value is what's going to kind of help drive that weight gain or weight loss. Yeah.
Well, I mean, explained like that, it is complicated, but it's at the core, it's actually pretty simple. It's literally, if your caloric intake is too high, then you're not going to lose weight, and your performance is going to suffer. If you're more at a deficit and then you're burning those calories and you're doing all your strength and conditioning, then that's a winning combination. That's a winning equation. So,
right.
Yeah.
And it boils down to the discipline of the individual. And a lot of this comes down to, for me or for you or for anyone out there, you're going to have to play with your numbers to find out what that deficit or what that surplus is going to be. I would encourage you guys, and for the sake of time, I won't dive into this specifically, but I would encourage you guys to look up what's called basal metabolic rate. Okay, it's BMR, not BMI, not to be confused. So when you guys are at home and you're listening to this, look up what your basal metabolic rate is. And there's an equation that you can utilize. Again, trying to save us a little bit of time here. Look up what your basal metabolic rate is. There's literally called basal metabolic rate calculators. You can take that calculator, punch in specific numbers, your height, your weight, your age, the list goes on, your lifestyle choice, and then it will give you what your basal metabolic rate is. What is my basic metabolic rate? Is basically, if I were just to lay in bed and sleep and not do anything, that's how many calories I need just to live and exist at the current weight that I'm at. And then it will give you, you can then scale it up from there. So now I'm going to, maybe I want to gain weight. Maybe I'm a super underweight guy. I want to put on some muscle. I want to build a little bit of strength, a little bit of size, go up 100, 200 calories and work from there. Experiment and figure out where you're at. If I need to lose weight, drop a little bit, 100 calories, 200 calories. Keep your energy sources high, such as your carbohydrates, and drop your fat source, maybe even your protein source a little bit, so that I can still have the energy throughout the day to perform the tasks that I need to, but now I'm still in a calorie deficit. So you guys look up basal metabolic rate and then try and gauge that surplus or deficit off of that, and you're going to have to figure out what's going to work for you.
Cool. Yeah, and that's another thing I'll try to have in the description, at least an avenue for you to start looking, because I'm sure there's a bunch of different resources that'll give you that calculation. You know, I'm sure there's a bunch of services that do it. So,
yeah.
But cool. So, anything else on nutrition before? I think a good way to summarize it all would be how to apply this to daily life. But was there anything else you wanted to touch? I know there's a lot more. I know you've had to trim a lot of the fat, no pun intended, but you know, which is why you know, and I'll make sure I say this again at the end, but it's why I highly recommend you go follow Sam over at DAGR Management, and I'll have all his information linked. But he also does have a podcast, which he's referenced a couple times, and it's super solid. And it's solo ran. It's just Sam just doing his thing. But as you can hear, he's just a wealth of knowledge, and he's an absolute beast at just giving you the information. And he's got you just started a series on kind of the same topic. Did you title it? Is it Combatant Fitness? Is that what you actually titled it?
It's just titled as fitness.
Okay.
So my first episodes start out in the tenets that we talked about. These are tenets that I believe that we as defense practitioners and combat athletes should adhere to. This being one of those tenets, but because there's so much into it, and as you stated, I've had to cleave a lot.
Yeah.
Trying to help as many guys out as I can, a lot of the listeners. But right now we just finished part 1. Part 2 will be dropped this week. I've already recorded it and everything else. I just have to pretty much put it out there.
Yep.
And then part 3, everything's already pretty much written out like it needs to be. I just need to put it out there for you guys. It's way more in depth than this. I've really tried to trim off a lot for the density of this particular episode, because I would relegate this into a mini series of itself, because there's a lot of material here. But to your point, Jacob, is in application to my life, just like any discipline that I adhere to, this is a lifelong endeavor. This is not something that I go, wow, I lost 30 pounds, or wow, I have an explosive high jump, or whatever it may be, and I've achieved that pinnacle of whatever it may be, and now I'm good. And I don't think we should ever. You brought this point up earlier, and I think it's important to note. And this, a lot of it, we could argue whether it's nature or nurture, as far as personalities are concerned. But for somebody like me, it's never good enough.
Yeah,
I am in a constant state that I always can do better. I can always be, and if I PR at something and I know like I've broken a threshold or a ceiling, cool. Now I can find another ceiling to break through. And, I did the powerlifting thing and I've, I competed in 99 kilograms, benching 475 pounds. And I go, wow, cool. I can lift that much weight. What else can I do? And now you're hearing me talk about, well, I want my broad jump to be a 9.5. I've broken 9. I want it to be a 9.5. So regardless of such, to me, for somebody, an individual like myself, it's never good enough. There's never enough. I'm never going to reach the ultimate, now I can stop. Now I can shut it all down. I can stop. And I think when we're talking about personalities, I understand that there are a lot of people out there that may not have that particular personality. And that was probably one of the hardest things for me. So I used to train and coach a lot of people. That was a big gig that I did off to the side part-time. And I think I got invested into watching people progress. And I would get emotionally invested into watching them progress and change and evolve. But then they would somehow fall off the end of the wagon. And now I almost took it more personal than I should have. And part of that also caused me to evolve as well. All these things is a sense of evolution for me. And part of that evolution was to also realize that not everybody has that personality drive that I have. And that, as I stated before, like it could be, we could argue that it's nature or nurture. I don't know. You could speculate, but regardless, not everybody has that drive. Not everybody's going to have the drive of, this isn't good enough. Now I need to try and break through more ceilings. However, what I will say is in understanding your why, regardless of whether your drive is to always break through the next ceiling or whether it's just, I need to be proficient, your why still needs to be a big part of that staple. So kind of, again, as we tie all this in, when we talk about, excuse me, when we talk about like pushing yourself to have the discipline of eating properly and basically just not gorging, because as I kind of laid it out a minute ago, it's like, look, man, you don't have to give up that awesome bread that you really enjoy. Maybe you like pasta or maybe you like cheese, or you don't have to give these things up. As long as you're doing something, you're ingesting something to a level of moderation and a level of discipline, it's totally doable. And it's the same thing with your physical fitness. Now, like I stated before, the studies have shown that 5-hour segment over a course of a week, and it's 100% doable, I believe, that 5-hour segment spread out throughout that course of a week is the bare minimum. So if you are somebody like me, maybe you're trying to break through that ceiling, maybe you want to continuously try and achieve, it's not to say that you can't do more. It's not to say that you can't up that to 8 hours a week or 10 hours a week or whatever it may be. So while we have laid all this out throughout this entire episode, we've just pretty much tried to give you the very base structure of where to begin and go from there. This is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just the tip of the spear here. There's a lot of material that we've really had to kind of cleave, but I think it's enough for a lot of people to kind of say, now I know where I can start. Now I know what kind of mechanical movements I need to utilize in the gym. I know what an RPE and an RIR scale are. So let me lift based off of that. And then we can go from there. We can always do another episode, but I have a podcast for those that don't know, or for those that do. Right now we're in the middle of this series, and it is a multi-part series because it is very intricate. So we'll be continuing to break this down even further. But I think that people have got to look at this like, this is a part of who I am. This is a life that if I choose to be, pro 2A, because if I'm to be truly real about all this, all the tenets that I've explained and or just as well as this fitness, this is part of the Second Amendment.
Absolutely.
This is part of what we preach when we go to the store and we're hanging out with our buddies at whatever convention or party we decide to to utilize in a social setting or at church or whatever it may be. And we're hanging out with our friends and we're going, I'm Second Amendment. Or you wear that t-shirt that says, my cold dead hands or whatever it may be. And you're like, Second Amendment this, Second Amendment that.
Yeah.
And it's like, look, buddy, this fitness stuff, this is Second Amendment too. All this combined together, all these tenets are part of the Second Amendment, because understanding the context is that we must have equal and or greater power to a possible oppressive government or tyrannical system. Mm-hmm. And you have to have this tool along with everything else.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to annotate that as well. And I'm not calling out anybody specifically, but I think it's important to
Michael hands, dude.
I'm trying not to call it. I think it's good. I think it's smart that we call out our own camp. I don't see this enough.
Sure,
I think
for sure. Accountability, man.
Yeah. It's like whatever political party you affiliate yourself with, whatever, a community or society or culture that you affiliate with, it's important to call out your own camp. I think this is important. So for us as pro 2A guys, it's not just about that giant vault that you've got in your house full of all these procured guns that are just, cool, from everything from some Henry liver action out to a Taron Butler build or whatever, right? We're talking, this goes beyond that, right?
Yeah.
This is a full encompassing element. So make sure that you make physical fitness a just as equally, if not a greater part of your life as you do collecting those guns and shooting and procuring Punisher stickers. Like all these things go together, right? So more so than you do all that, you need to make sure that you
can't wear a Punisher skull if the only thing you've punished is your gut biome. Like you need to be
right. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Like,
exactly.
Yeah. If you're talking the talk, you got to walk the walk. And I think that's something
100%.
that is so cool about you. And it's why I would encourage anybody to go follow him and to absolutely take him up on listening to his multi-part series on this, because like Sam has said, this is already going to be one of our longest episodes for good reason, and we're just scratching the surface. And I've already learned so much just by sitting here talking to you. But Sam is one of those guys that does walk the walk. Like when you look him up and look at him, you're going to be like, okay, like I get why the Barlow boys asked him to deliver this information. And you've always been the guy that if I had questions about fitness, you're the guy I go to. I'm like, yep, I'm going to ask Sam, because I'm, or some trendy diet comes up. I'm like, what do you think about this? And you're just like, it doesn't matter. Your caloric intake is what matters. But yeah, I mean, you're dead on. It's a calling out our own camp. We got to do it. And because ultimately it's like, if we're not holding each other accountable, and it's not just fitness, it's everything. But like you said, this is at the pinnacle of everything else. I kind of view it almost not opposite, but just from a different perspective, is like, this is the foundation you should build on. Because like, if you can't even pick something up and walk it long distance with it, or like you said, you can't you can't physically grab somebody and move them around. Simple things, all these simple fitness, simple movement exercises that you laid out. It's like, if you can't do these things, then how in the world do you expect to pick up a rifle and defend your community from someone who is probably a trained killer? It's not, we're not messing around. Like this is absolutely a fundamental part of this whole mission or perspective. So
yeah, be an asset, don't be a liability. I mean, that's huge. That's a big part of this. And we talked about earlier, do something once a day. It makes you feel uncomfortable. I'm gonna be 100% transparent. I actually brought this up to you earlier, but before we even started the episode. Probably one of my weakest points in regards to the whole 2A community and things that I need to be better at is comms, communications, right? And you guys have preached this as well. Comms needs to be a big part of your 2A training and a big part of your knowledge set. And comms, I know enough to pass EIB, like I know enough to get through EIB, like
you could load a freak in that ASIP.
yeah, I could put a freak in. I can put together an embedder, or like, I know the basics of a standard Harris radio, or, one of the old Johnsons, but it's like, I didn't, and I will say in the last probably 4 to 6 months, especially, but as of very late recently, I have been trying to educate myself more so on that field as well. So to everyone out there, like to the guy that's, that says, hey, I don't have an athletic bone in my body. I don't know anything. Hey, brother, I'm in the same boat as you in regards to, I was an adult when I learned how to build a folder on a desktop, dude. Like, so like I'm in the same camp as you as far as that's concerned. So we're in this together. We're just on opposite ends of the spectrum. And I'm telling you, you don't have to be the most prime athlete of the world to start this. Our goal is always to be the best prime athlete that we can be. But to start this, you don't have to be somebody that is just of super physiological status. You can definitely just get off your couch and let's start. Mm-hmm. Let's just start. We'll go somewhere. Let's start. Let's get this going. And all of us in the community, I'm speaking to all of us. Let's trade off the information. Let's procure this stuff together.
Yeah.
I've got our team. We train just like you guys do. I've got my nerds. You guys got your nerds. And they teach me all about the cool stuff and, and encryption cards and how to pull the radios apart, putting these things in there. And then, so again, to my own weakness, I've got a Motorola P25. Those things have been in service forever. I mean, they're great radios, great for encryption comms, but it's not something that's a strong suit for me. And like I said, I know the basis of it, but I'm making it a point to go out of my comfort zone, to take that little extra time in the day, whether it's 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes a day, to just say, okay, I'm going to look up shortwave versus long wave, or I'm going to look up, whatever it may be. And I think this is important for us to look at as well as this. So we're all in a taking ourselves out of our comfort zones together. So this isn't to hurt anybody, or, if it's offensive, it probably means we probably just need to change what we're doing.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think, you can build so much character and resilience in just seeking out difficulty, seeking out, and purposefully putting yourself in uncomfortable, undesirable situations. Now, you don't have to torture yourself. That's not what I mean. But,
right.
Putting on, Steven and I really try to make a point of like, do we have time for this? No, we usually don't. But it's like, all right, let's put the snowshoes on. Let's put some packs on. And before we start our grind here in the shop, let's go smash through the snow. And, it's like ungroomed, and it sucks. And every time without fail, I'm in the middle of doing it. And I'm like, why am I out here now caught in halfway through this freaking giant field where I can't go, it's I'm too far in to just like going back is not going to be any faster than continuing on, but
right.
You always get something out of that. And it's not just physical fitness in that kind of example. It's like, how are my shoulder pads riding? My snowshoe bindings are being stupid. What's going on? I got to retain my straps. Oh, I'm an idiot. My ascent clips are popped up and I'm leaning forward all stupid. That's a specific example, but these are things we can do that, yeah, they're not fun in the moment, but you always get something out of it, especially if you have the right mindset. And that's something that has been a big thing for me, because fitness has been one of my biggest weaknesses. I haven't prioritized it. It's not something that I prioritize near to the level that I should even today. And I'm better than I've ever been as far as my mindset goes. But I've got a lot of work to do just on myself. I'm a work in progress. But kind of to your point, it's like you should always have that work in progress mentality, always try to do better and always try to learn. I think seeking comfort. Actually, recently we did a podcast with a guy that was talking about sustainable agriculture. His name was Jeremy. And he said, seeking comfort is the root of all evil. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
I was like, dude, that's spot on. He said he's like, that's something I say to my kids all the time. And I think, I would tend to agree with that. Now, there's times where we can take a break and, do things that are comfortable or fun for us to do. Obviously, that's important, but always measuring every task in your life with how comfortable and easy is this going to be for me to achieve, I think is setting yourself up for failure. And you just have to do hard things to become hard. That's just what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and that's, we always joke in the martial arts community and jiu-jitsu especially, we'll get a lot of guys that say, you know, oh man, I don't need to train. I just see red and bodies start dropping to the floor. And it's like, no, man, that's you think that you're going to rise to that occasion. It's not going to happen.
No,
you know, it's an old Stoic quote. I don't remember. It might be Socrates or it could be Marcus Aurelius, but he's prompted with saying, and I'm paraphrasing this because I'm going to chew it up if I try to directly quote it. But he basically states, oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought with that one. We were just talking about,
you said it was either Marcus Aurelius.
Sorry guys, I have traumatic brain injury.
Dude, the TBI trio. You said it was either Marcus Aurelius or
no. Prior to that, well, the subject in itself, it was
you gotta do hard things to get hard.
Oh, comfort.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, we're gonna have to cut that one because that was retarded. I can't even. We gotta cut that out.
It's in there, dude. We're riding with it.
All right, cool. So, gosh, what is wrong with me? All right, sorry.
No, you're good.
It's part of the idea that I have found that comfort is cancer. It's something that I've similar to the quote that you guys were talking about. Something I've said to my mother is comfort is cancer. I agree with you that physical health and mental health coincide. And so sometimes you need to take breaks for the sake of your mental health. I'm not saying don't take a break. I'm not saying don't relax. Okay. I'm by no means, I'm not David Goggins, and there's no knock at him. He's phenomenal, real tough dude. But for the sake of mental health, if you need to take those breaks, by all means do it. But at the same time, I think a lot of us don't realize just how much more capable than we are. Like you just don't know what you don't know until you get there. So human beings in general, we're extremely capable creatures. Like we're very capable. And so thinking that like, oh, this little bit of pain or this little bit of discomfort, it's just too much. Or if I go one more mile or I go one more step or I do one more rep, whatever, I'm just going to break off and die. And it's like, no, chances are your brain is going to give up faster than your body will.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is just the mental capacity that you care to push yourself. So being in a constant state of discomfort, like we talked about, it creates, it's like the old saying, a hard body creates a hard mind. So you'll find that you actually need less breaks because you're not a sadist. You're not being like a sadist. You know, you're not like, oh, I find comfort in pain, although there is that element to it. But you almost, your level of comfort or expectation of comfort changes based on constantly being in a state of discomfort. So, imagine if what is comfortable for you, and I'm not saying running is the answer, but let's say running is extremely uncomfortable, but not running is extremely comfortable. If you're in a constant state of discomfort because you've ran and you've built up a tolerance to the pain in itself and the discomfort, now what's comfortable might be just running 2 or 3 miles versus what's uncomfortable is running 5 to 10. So that level of progression will change the way you perceive comfort. So I'm not saying don't take comfort, but the harder you train, your perception of comfort changes along with that. And I think it's important to note that. So train as often as you can, train as hard as you can, within reason, of course, because that will allow you to readjust your perception of comfort itself.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly right. I mean, I think you're just building your endurance, and I don't only mean physical endurance. I mean even your mental endurance. It's like something that used to be super hard for you isn't a big deal anymore. And then when you're met with other trials and tribulations in life, they might not seem like a big deal because you know how far you can go, and you have trained yourself to be able to endure hardship. And I think that's something that should absolutely be worked on. We got asked on our story recently. We did ask us a question, that whole thing. And somebody asked, what do you see the biggest weakness being? Or I'm paraphrasing. I can't remember how they asked it. Something like, what do you think the biggest weakness is, or the biggest thing that people need to work on as far as training, in the 2A community? And I think the question was phrased as shooters. So I gave like a specific answer for if you're only talking about shooting, and then I gave a overarching kind of answer. And from my perspective, it was big picture. Like it was like, having better fitness. It was pursuing things beyond what's just fun, like medical training, going out and doing fieldcraft survival stuff, grappling. Like these are all things that aren't viewed as quote unquote fun, even though they can all be very fun. That's all, that's all in your mind. That's a mindset thing. But they're not, in this community, they're not like the go-to, like, hey, if you're going to do a range day and have pizza party out on the range, or, or, hey, we're going to go ruck 12 miles and then do like a swim at this lake and then ruck back. It's like most people are going to pick the range day and pizza party, but you can benefit a lot more out of something else. So yeah, I think just kind of shifting to this mindset of like, hey, big picture, like we got a lot of work to do as a community. And just like you said, I mean, we're not pointing fingers. Like this whole podcast, I'm pointing back at myself. Like this has been huge for me. I mean, it's actually motivating me to pick it up a notch. So I think this not only is super attainable and super within our capabilities, but it's just a no-brainer. Like it should be a given. Like if you subscribe to this idea and this lifestyle, this should just be, it's just part of it. Like there's no way around it. You can't cherry pick and be like, well, I'll be, I've got a sub-second draw. I'm never going to have to fight anybody. It's like, no, dude, like you can't just, like we can't cherry pick it like that. Like it's,
somebody comes out and starts physically assaulting you, and and we also have to understand, like, we're judged by a jury of our peers. We know that we're going to go to court. We're going to have to justify our situation. And I've talked about this in our mindset episode that I had on my podcast. It was a lot of guys use the colloquial term within our community. They say, well, I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6 or whatever. And it's like, well, the idea is I'd like to just be able to go home. And I think putting ego aside of that particular part of the element, not everything requires a gun and or can be justified in utilizing a firearm, right? Yeah. And we're talking, put tyranny aside. If someone is assaulting me and or my family, a firearm, like for me, for example, maybe there's another guy out there that's not athletically superior and he doesn't have a tool in his hand. It's going to be hard for me as an individual to justify pulling out a firearm to defend myself against this guy, because I'm in pretty good physical fitness shape. And this guy might not be, but just because, one element may be obtained and the other element is not, I may still have to physically have an altercation with this person that does not require a firearm, due to the fact that it's not justifiable for me to be able to use it in this situation. Now, if I was a 90-year-old woman at 5'3" and, 105 pounds wet, sure, she might be able to justify utilizing a firearm against an unarmed attacker. So therefore, could she make the argument that, hey, I used a firearm? Sure, but she's probably going to have to go through at least a year or two worth of trial time and, take time out of whatever it is. Like you're in your twilight years and you're going to have to do all this, take time to go through a trial to justify the art of self-defense with a firearm. Fitness and or a combatant skill set such as jiu-jitsu, wrestling, Muay Thai, or whatever, those skill sets may be the only tool that you can utilize in that particular instance. Yeah. And I think it's important that we understand that the firearm is not the end-all be-all answer to everything. If I have hemorrhaging from a limb, I'm not going to go, well, thank God I got my Glock 19. Like, what? That doesn't, I'm not going to take that Glock and stop bleeding with it. Yeah. So it's the same premise that I'm not going to try and use my pistol or my carbine to stop bleeding. you need to understand that fitness is encompassing to this, not even just from the fighting capacity, but also for the sake of stress inoculation. Like I put myself in that level of discomfort and stress over a course of time, I'm more likely to have a better adaptability to high stress situations because I've become a little more inoculated to it over time. And that's, if you think for 1 second that you create some arbitrary two-dimensional scenario on a range, that's enough stress. It's not enough stress to prepare you for a fight, buddy. It's just, it's not. And I messed up earlier in talking about like the Stoic quote. I remember what it was. It's that we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. And it's a very prominent thing that I think is important for all of us to understand, that if you think that when the time comes that you're going to be ready to just react properly, even if you're good with a gun, your level of coordination and what we actually call reactive strength, it's on that force velocity scale that we brought up earlier, force velocity curve. We find that your reactive strength plays a factor in your coordination and reactive time physiologically. So even manipulating that firearm under stress and duress, you still have to have some level of fitness to exacerbate that to the best of your ability. So I think it's important for us to understand, like, not everything requires a firearm. You may be the actual tool in that instance to have to thwart the situation. We had an incident earlier to where, I live out here in the cut out in the country, and acres and acres of land. If there's a situation on the other side of my property, because I have a wide span of property here, and it's, this is real thick, lush greenery here. It stays pretty green most of year round. If I got to run from one end to the other, I've got to run 10 acres, give or take, full sprint, because there's an altercation happening on the other end. But I now have to deal with that altercation after already sprinting the 10 acres that I sprinted. You need to have the aerobic capacity and the anaerobic capacity to do so. So it's not always just like, I got a gun, now I can have a 56-inch waist. And it's like, no, it's not. They're not equivalent in nature, So fitness is going to not only aid, it's actually going to make everything else so much more efficient.
Yeah, and by the way, I just want to throw this in there. That literally happened mid-podcast, that situation he's talking about. So, yeah. Sam had somebody show up at his house, and someone was calling him, and he's like, "Hey guys, you're gonna have to pause it. I live out here. I'm not supposed to have any visitors right now. Somebody random pulled up." And he's like, "I'll be back." So we pause it. He's gone, and then he comes back like pretty quick, and he's just like, "Sorry, I just sprinted 10 acres there and back. We're good. There's no one there. And let's keep going." And we're just like, okay. So yeah, that was a thing. But yeah, but that's a great example. It's like literally right here, right now, sitting down, chilling, recording a podcast. We're all drinking our coffee, doing whatever, and then all of a sudden, boom, life hits you. You got to go take care of business. It's like, that's just how life is, man. So yeah, it's a great example. But well, dude, we're gonna bring this to a wrap here. Huge thanks for coming on. Thank you for dedicating the time. I know you got a super busy schedule, so it means a lot for you to sit down and get on the podcast with us. I want to reiterate that Sam does have his own podcast, and I will link that in the description. I'm also going to link his Instagram, and you have a website too, correct?
I do.
So
yeah.
I'll link all that stuff. Yeah.
DAGRmanagement.com, DAGR management.com. So yeah.
And then the podcast, is it called the DAGR Management Podcast? Is that the title?
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, you can get it on Apple. You can get it on Spotify. Pretty much almost anywhere that you're going to be able to get his podcasts. The RSS is thrown out there to everything. So, yeah, if you've got Amazon Music, you can also listen to it through your Amazon Prime account as well. So sweet.
So yeah, absolutely take advantage of that. Like we said earlier, he's got a multi-part series going on this entire topic, and really getting into like going through it with a fine-tooth comb, which I think is worth understanding. That's the other thing I wanted to say really quick, is that just like anything, how some people obsess on like comm specs and SDRs and, this antenna does this, or some people get like into the nitty gritty on like their specs on their night vision tubes. It's like, oh, my intensifier can do this and that, and then other people are like, oh, my build is tuned to this pressure and like with Mark 262, people get obsessed about this stuff, but so often we leave out how we're priming our own body for performance and fueling our own body. And it should be spec'd out, I think, to the same level of obsession before any of this other stuff. And it's something I want to work on. So, because I definitely don't do that. So, definitely, I'm going to be checking out your series. So I'm looking forward to it. I highly recommend anybody else do it. Go give Sam and DAGR Management a follow. He's got an awesome company. If you're in the North Carolina area, hit him up. He's running classes. It sounds like you've got a lot of cool training and educational programs on the horizon, which is really cool. But yeah, man, you got anything, Steven?
No, just thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, you got anything before we button her up? Put a bow on it?
No, I'm sorry if I fried some brains out there. It's a lot of information.
No worries, man.
I try to articulate it in the most concise way that I can. Definitely go check out the episodes that I'll be putting out, because they're way more in depth. And I know this felt in depth. Jacob, I think I appreciate you for having me on here. This is huge. This is a big deal, and I really appreciate it. And I think you hit the nail on the head whenever you stated you need to know all this so that you can have the tools to start building your own programs, start building your own dietary needs. We say this a lot in the Second Amendment community and the gun community. No one's coming. It's you. It's just you relying on you. I don't want you to have to rely on paying someone else $250 for every phasic plan that comes out of your strength and conditioning and your meal plans or whatever. Have the tools that you can start developing this on your own so that you can do this until the day that you get put under.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, thanks again. Super, super informative episode. We'd love to have you back on in the future if you want to come back on and we can get more into this, or, there's a lot of other things I think talking about combatives, like more hand-to-hand grappling stuff, would be really cool as well. That's a whole other aspect that I know you know a lot about, and it'd be awesome to get into. So thanks again for the time, man.
Thanks, brother.